The fires of Nocturne burned with ancient grief that night, their flames reaching toward the storm-racked heavens as though seeking answers from the darkness beyond. In the sacred halls of Mount Deathfire, where the salamanders had gathered for their ritual of mourning, the air trembled with more than volcanic fury. The chapter mourned its fallen, as they had for 10,000 years. But on this night, the weight of loss felt heavier than ever before. Vulkan Hestan, forge father of the salamanders, knelt before the altar of remembrance, with his battle brothers surrounding him in silent vigil. His armor bore the scars of countless campaigns, each mark a testament to the chapter's endless war against humanity's enemies. The sacred spear of Vulkan rested across his knees, its blessed blade flickering with inner fire that cast dancing shadows upon the volcanic stone. Around his neck hung Kesere's mantle, the ancient cloak that had belonged to his primarch, while upon his hands gleamed the gauntlet of the forge. 3 of the 9 artifacts, 3 relics of power beyond measure, yet still not enough to bring their father home. The morning chant echoed through the chamber, a low harmonic that seemed to resonate with the planet's molten core itself. Each name spoken was a brother lost, a friend fallen, a guardian of humanity who would never again stand watch over the innocent. For hours the litany continued, until even the strongest voices grew hoarse with sorrow. Yet as the final names faded into silence, something changed. The flames upon the altar blazed higher, their orange glow shifting to brilliant white. Histan felt heat wash over him, not the comfortable warmth of Nocturne's forges, but something far more profound. The spear of Vulkan grew hot in his hands, and Kesere's mantle seemed to stir with its own wind. Then the vision struck him like a hammer blow to the soul. Fire erupted behind Histan's eyes, not the destructive flame of war, but the cleansing fire of creation itself. Through the conflagration, he saw worlds spinning in the void, each one marked with significance he could not yet understand. 4 points of light blazed brighter than the rest, calling to him with voices older than memory. The first light showed him a death world, wreathed in poisonous mists, where ancient Mechanicus ruins crumbled beneath alien suns. Deep within those ruins, protected by layers of adamantium and sacred wards, lay the engine of woes. Its power had never been unleashed, but Histan could feel its terrible potential, radiating across the galaxy like a dark star. The second vision revealed a space hulk drifting through the void, an amalgamation of ships from a dozen different eras, welded together by chance and malice. Within its twisted corridors, guarded by horrors best left unnamed, waited the song of entropy. The drake-headed staff pulsed with entropic energy that could unmake the very foundations of reality. The third sight showed him a system locked in eternal battle, where the dead refused to rest and the living fought wars that had raged for millennia. There, upon a world where pyramids touched the stars, the obsidian chariot waited beneath layers of Necron steel and Eldar wraithbone. Its armor was indeed near impregnable, as the ancient texts claimed. But it was the fourth vision that stole the breath from Histan's lungs and set his heart racing with impossible hope. A ship, ancient beyond measure, drifted in the lightless void between the stars. Upon its hull blazed the sacred salamander of his chapter, though the vessel was older than any craft in their current fleet. Within its deepest chamber, in a stasis field that hummed with power beyond comprehension, lay the unbound flame. Vulkan's own casket, the device that had once held their Primarch's broken form, now serving as the final key to his return. As the vision reached its crescendo, Histan heard a voice that he had thought lost forever. Deep as the core of Nocturne, warm as the forge fires of creation, His Primarch spoke to him across the vast emptiness of space and time. "My son," the voice whispered, and Histan felt tears of joy and anguish stream down his cheeks. "The hour of awakening draws near. Long have I wandered in darkness, my essence scattered across the galaxy, waiting for the moment when my children would gather the keys to my return. You have found 3 of my gifts. 4 more await your touch. When all 9 are brought together, when the ritual of my making is fulfilled, I will return to stand once more at your side." The voice grew stronger, more urgent. "But beware, faithful Histan. The enemy knows what approaches. Even now their agents move to claim what is mine, to prevent the resurrection they fear above all else. You must move swiftly, for the window of opportunity grows narrow. The storms that rage across the galaxy herald a time of great change, and in that change lies either salvation or damnation for all mankind." The vision shattered like breaking glass, leaving Histan gasping on the chamber floor. Around him, his battle brothers rushed to his aid, their faces etched with concern and wonder, for they too had felt something of the vision's power, had seen the reflection of those sacred flames in their Forge Father's eyes. Captain Agatone was the first to reach him, the veteran's weathered features tight with worry. "Brother Forge Father, what has transpired? The very walls seemed to burn with inner light." Histan struggled to his feet, his limbs still trembling from the vision's intensity. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Our father lives, my brothers. Vulkan endures, waiting for us to bring him home." Silence fell upon the chamber like a physical weight. For 10,000 years the salamanders had searched for their missing Primarch, following every lead, pursuing every legend. Some believed him dead, others insisted he would return when humanity's need was greatest. But none had expected confirmation to come like this, in fire and vision, and the voice of their gene sire himself. "The final 4 artifacts," Histan continued, his strength returning with each word. "I have seen their locations. The Engine of Woes rests upon the death world of Mordax. The Song of Entropy lies within the Space Hulk, Perdition's crown. The Obsidian Chariot waits in the Charybdis system, guarded by the ancient dead. And the Unbound Flame." He paused, overwhelmed by the significance of what he had witnessed. "The Unbound Flame drifts in the void beyond the Ghoul stars, aboard a vessel of our own make." Brother Captain Pelas Mirsan stepped forward, his voice heavy with the weight of duty. "If what you have seen is true, Forge Father, then we must act immediately. But the risks—" He gestured toward the chamber's great windows, where the night sky revealed distant flashes of unnatural lightning. "The warp storms grow stronger with each passing day. Our astropaths report increasing difficulty in maintaining communications across the subsector. To launch 4 separate expeditions into such chaos is our sacred duty," Histan finished firmly. "We are the sons of Vulkan, guardians of humanity, keepers of the sacred flame. If there is a chance, however slim, to restore our Primarch to the galaxy, then we must take it, no matter the cost." The debate that followed stretched deep into Nocturne's night, but Histan knew its outcome before the first words were spoken. When dawn broke over Mount Deathfire, painting the volcanic peaks in shades of gold and crimson, the decision had been made. 4 strike forces would be assembled, each led by a captain of proven valor and skill. They would venture forth into the darkness, following the coordinates burned into Histan's memory by divine vision. Chapter Master Tushan's approval came reluctantly, weighted with the knowledge of what such an undertaking would cost. Nearly half the chapter's strength would be committed to the quest, leaving Nocturne and the surrounding systems more vulnerable than they had been in centuries. But the salamanders had not endured for 10 millennia by choosing the easy path. They had survived because they understood that some things were worth any price. As the forged temples of Nocturne rang with the sound of preparation, as weapons were blessed and ships made ready for the void, Hestan stood once more before the altar of remembrance. The sacred artifacts around him seemed to pulse with anticipation, as though they too felt the approach of their long-awaited reunion. "We come, Father," he whispered to the flames. "Your sons remember their duty. Your fire shall burn eternal." In the deepest chambers of Mount Deathfire, where the chapter's most sacred relics were kept, ancient machines began to stir. The Tome of Fire, that mysterious text left by their Primarch millennia ago, flickered with inner light as though responding to the moment it had been created to herald. The time of gathering had begun. Yet even as hope blazed bright in the hearts of the salamanders, dark forces stirred in response. Across the galaxy, servants of chaos felt a disturbance in the warp, a shift in the cosmic balance that spoke of dangerous changes ahead. The artifacts of Vulkan represented more than mere weapons or tools of power. They were keys to a resurrection that could alter the very nature of the eternal war between order and chaos. The hunt for the final 4 artifacts would not go uncontested, but the salamanders had faced the worst the galaxy could offer and emerged victorious. Now they would face it again, not for conquest or glory, but for the return of their father and the protection of all humanity. The vision of fire had shown them the way. Now they had only to walk it, no matter where it led. The death world of Mordax writhed beneath a sickly amber sky, its poisoned atmosphere thick with the chemical legacy of wars fought long before the Imperium ever cast its light upon this forgotten corner of the galaxy. Ancient Mechanicus ruins jutted from the planet's scarred surface like the bones of some primordial beast, their corroded metal and crumbling ceramite telling tales of hubris and catastrophe that predated even the dark age of technology. Brother Captain Harath Shen led the Salamander's strike force through the toxic wasteland with grim determination. His artificer armor, bearing the sacred drake-scale pattern of his chapter, gleamed dully in the filtered light as servo skulls swept ahead of the advancing marines. Behind him marched 2 full companies of his battle brothers, their weapons blessed and their hearts steeled for what they might find in the depths of the ancient complex. The vision had been clear. Here, beneath layers of corrupted adamantium and twisted steel, lay the engine of woes, the first of the 4 artifacts that would herald their Primarch's return. Yet as they descended deeper into the ruins, Shen could not shake the feeling that they were being watched by eyes that saw far more than mortal sight should allow. Sergeant Veltar, veteran of 3 centuries of warfare, approached the captain's position as they reached the entrance to the deepest vault. His scarred features bore the ritual brands of Mount Deathfire, each mark a testament to his unwavering faith. "Brother Captain, the Auspex readings are troubling. There are energy signatures emanating from below that do not conform to any pattern in our archives." Shen nodded grimly. The Forge Father's vision spoke of power beyond our understanding, brother. We must trust in our Primarch's wisdom and the strength of our purpose. He gestured toward the vault's massive doors, which bore the twisted remnants of Mechanicus symbols, corrupted by millennia of exposure to the warp's influence. Whatever lies within has waited 10,000 years for this moment. We will not fail in our duty. The seals upon the vault doors proved no match for melter charges and the righteous fury of the salamanders. As the ancient barriers crumbled, a wave of energy washed over the strike force, not the burning heat of plasma or flame, but something far colder and more terrible. It was the absence of warmth, the negation of hope itself, and it set every marine's teeth on edge with its alien wrongness. Within the vault, suspended in a stasis field that flickered with failing power, hung the Engine of Woes. The artifact defied easy description, its form seeming to shift between states of matter, as though it existed partially outside the normal laws of reality. Parts of it gleamed like polished obsidian, while other sections appeared to absorb light itself, creating wounds in the air that hurt to perceive directly. By the Forge Father's sacred name, whispered Techmarine Vorthak, his augmetic eye whirring as it struggled to process what it beheld. The cogitators cannot even classify its material composition. It exists in a state of quantum flux that should be impossible to maintain. As they approached the stasis field, the artifact seemed to pulse with inner darkness, responding to their presence like a sleeping predator sensing prey. Shen felt the weight of decision settle upon his shoulders like a mantle of lead. To claim the engine would require deactivating the stasis field, releasing whatever energies had been contained for millennia. Yet without it, their quest would fail before it truly began. "Stand ready, brothers," he commanded, drawing his master-crafted bolt pistol. "We know not what forces have been drawn to this place by our presence, but we shall face them as our Primarch taught us, with fire and fury and protection for those who cannot protect themselves." The moment the stasis field collapsed, reality convulsed. The Engine of Woes dropped into Shen's waiting hands, and immediately he understood why his Primarch had named it thus. The artifact was not merely a weapon or tool, but something far more profound and terrible. It was entropy given form, the power to unmake the very bonds that held matter and energy in their ordained patterns. In his grip, it felt like holding a star's dying breath, cold and final and utterly without mercy. But its awakening had not gone unnoticed by the denizens of the Immaterium. The air above the vault tore open like fabric cut by an invisible blade, and through the wound in reality stepped a being of crystalline malice and ever-shifting form. The greater demon of Tzinch towered above the Marines, its body a constantly flowing amalgamation of impossible geometries and colors that existed only in the realm of pure thought. 9 eyes blazed along its serpentine neck, each one reflecting a different aspect of fate and change, while its clawed hands dripped with the essence of transformation itself. "Mortals," the demon spoke, its voice echoing from a dozen different directions at once. "You know not what you have claimed. That artifact belongs to powers beyond your comprehension. Surrender it, and I may yet allow you the mercy of madness rather than oblivion." Captain Shen's response came not in words, but in the ignition of his jump pack and the roar of his Chainsword's motor. The salamanders had faced the servants of chaos before, had stood against the very worst the galaxy could offer. They would not yield here, not when their Primarch's return hung in the balance. The battle that followed defied every tactical doctrine in the Codex Astartes. The demon's sorcery warped space and time around it, causing bolter rounds to loop back upon themselves, and melter beams to freeze in mid-air before exploding into cascades of impossible colors. Marines found themselves fighting battles that had not yet begun while experiencing deaths that had already been undone by the creature's manipulation of causality. Yet through it all, Shen gripped the Engine of Woes with unwavering determination, feeling its power resonate with his own fury. The artifact seemed to hunger for the daemon's essence, pulling at his consciousness with whispered promises of victory. As his brothers fell around him, their forms twisted by Tzinchian sorcery into shapes that violated every law of anatomy, the captain made his choice. He activated the Engine of Woes, The effect was immediate and absolute. A wave of pure negation erupted from the artifact, washing over the demon like a tide of absolute ending. Where it touched, the creature's form did not merely disperse or retreat into the warp, but ceased entirely. The very concept of its existence was unraveled thread by thread, until not even the memory of its presence remained in the fabric of reality. The demon's death scream was not heard, but felt, a vibration that struck at the fundamental level of existence itself. Across the galaxy, servants of Sinch stumbled as they felt one of their patrons chosen, obliterated, not just in body but in essence. This was not banishment or temporary destruction, but true death in the most absolute sense possible. As silence fell upon the vault, Shen looked around at his surviving brothers with wonder and horror in equal measure. The engine of woes had grown warm in his hands, as though it had fed upon the demon's destruction and found the meal satisfying. Several of his battle brothers bore wounds that should have been fatal. Yet they lived still, the artifact's power having somehow reached back through time to prevent their demise. "Captain," Sergeant Veltar's voice was filled with awe, and not a little fear. "What we have witnessed here, this is power beyond anything in our arsenal. If all of our Primarch's artifacts possess such capabilities, then we begin to understand why Vulkan scattered them across the galaxy," Shen finished quietly. "Such power could not be allowed to rest in one place, lest it attract the attention of enemies we are not yet ready to face." He secured the engine of woes within a specially prepared containment field, its dark energies now quiescent, but still radiating a sense of barely contained destruction. The journey back to their strike cruiser proved uneventful, yet Shen could feel eyes upon them from the immaterium itself. The demon's death had sent ripples through the warp that would not soon fade, and other servants of chaos would now know that the salamanders possessed weapons capable of true destruction. The war for the artifacts had begun in earnest. As their ship broke atmosphere and prepared for warp translation back to Nocturne, Shen composed the astropathic message that would carry news of their success across the void. The words came slowly, weighted with the significance of what they had discovered. "To Vulkan Histan, Forge Father of the Salamanders, from Captain Harath Shen of the 4th Company. Mission accomplished. The engine of woes has been recovered and contained. Be advised, the artifact's capabilities exceed all expectations. It does not merely banish the servants of chaos, but destroys them utterly, preventing their return to the immaterium. The fire that burns chaos forever has been kindled. We return to Nocturne with all speed. The Forge Father's legacy endures." As the message winged its way through the warp toward their home world, Shen stood before the artifact's containment field and wondered what forces they had truly set in motion. The engine of woes pulsed quietly in its prison, patient and terrible and hungry for more of Chaos's servants to unmake. In the deepest reaches of the immaterium, beings of immense power stirred with newfound awareness. The salamanders had claimed one of Vulkan's artifacts, and its awakening had revealed capabilities that posed a genuine threat to the eternal war between order and chaos. The game had changed, and the stakes were now higher than they had ever been. Yet aboard the strike cruiser Forge Eternal, the salamanders felt only satisfaction at their success. They had claimed the first of the 4 artifacts, and with it taken the first step towards their Primarch's return. 3 more quests awaited, 3 more chances to prove their worthiness as sons of Vulkan. The fire of hope burned bright in their hearts, and no power in the galaxy would be allowed to extinguish it. Across the stars, on distant worlds where other salamanders' strike forces pursued their own sacred missions, similar scenes of violence and discovery would soon unfold. The Engine of Woes was but the first key in a lock that had remained sealed for 10 millennia. When all four were gathered, when the ritual of awakening could finally be completed, the galaxy itself would tremble at the return of the Lord of Drakes. But that moment still lay weeks ahead, separated by trials that would test the very limits of Astarte's endurance and faith. For now, it was enough that the first step had been taken, and that the Engine of Woes had proven Vulkan's artifacts possessed power beyond mortal understanding. The hunt continued, and with each success, the return of their Primarch drew closer to reality. The space hulk Perdition's crown drifted through the void like a cancerous growth against the stars, its twisted hull an amalgamation of vessels from a dozen different eras fused together by the malevolent forces of the warp. Ancient imperial cruisers jutted from its mass alongside Xenos craft of unknown origin, while fragments of Mechanicus exploration ships provided skeletal frameworks for the nightmarish structure that had been growing for millennia. Brother Captain Daker studied the hulk's sensor readings from the bridge of the strike cruiser Fireborn, his scarred features grim with determination. The Song of Entropy lay somewhere within that twisted labyrinth of metal and madness, waiting to be claimed by those brave enough to venture into its depths. His company had volunteered for this mission, knowing full well the dangers that space hulks represented. But they were salamanders, and no risk was too great when the return of their Primarch hung in the balance. The augury readings are consistent with Forge Father Haystan's vision, reported Techmarine Vashta, his servo arms manipulating a dozen different scanning devices simultaneously. Deep within the hulk's central mass, approximately 6 kilometers from the nearest breach point, there is an energy signature that matches no known imperial technology. It pulses with a rhythm that suggests active containment systems. Sergeant Loktar, veteran of 2 centuries of boarding actions, approached the captain's position with the measured tread of a warrior who had faced the worst the galaxy could offer. Brother Captain, the Auspex readings also show signs of recent activity within the hulk, power signatures that suggest inhabited sections, and debris patterns consistent with recent combat. Dakir nodded grimly. Word of the Salamander's quest had spread despite their efforts at secrecy, carried by astropathic whispers and the subtle networks that connected the galaxy's various factions. If others had learned of the artifact's true power, as demonstrated on Mordax, then the race to claim them had begun in earnest. "We proceed as planned," he declared, his voice carrying the authority of one who had never known retreat. 3 squads, close formation, moving through the identified breach points simultaneously. We reach the artifact's location, secure it, and extract before whatever lurks in those corridors can organize effective resistance. The boarding action began with the screaming of melter cutters and the thunder of drop pod engines. Dakir led the first squad through a breach in what had once been an Imperial Navy destroyer, its corridors long since twisted by exposure to warp energies into configurations that hurt the mind to contemplate. Emergency lumens flickered with sickly light, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. As they penetrated deeper into the hulk's interior, the signs of recent conflict became impossible to ignore. Bolter craters scarred the walls alongside weapon impacts from sources that registered as unknown to their armor's machine spirits. The air carried the acrid scent of burned ceramite, and something else, something that spoke of corruption and deliberate malice. It was Sergeant Loktar who first spotted the heraldry that confirmed their worst suspicions. Scorched into the metal of a bulkhead, barely visible beneath layers of grime and battle damage, was the twisted skull of the Death Guard Legion. The Chaos Space Marines had been here, and recently. "Contact front," came the Vox transmission from Squad Heskan. positioned 2 kilometers deeper into the hulk. Enemy forces in unknown power armor, heretical markings confirmed. They appear to be establishing defensive positions around a central chamber. Dakir's jaw tightened as the tactical situation became clear. The Chaos forces had not simply stumbled upon the artifact by chance. They had come here deliberately, drawn by the same knowledge that had guided the salamanders. The traitors sought to claim the Song of Entropy for their dark masters, to prevent its power from being used against the servants of the ruinous powers. "All squads converge on the artifact chamber," he commanded, his bolt pistol already in his hand. "Show them the fury of Vulkan's sons." The battle that followed raged through corridors that had not seen conflict for centuries, filling the ancient spaces with the thunder of bolter fire and the screaming of chain swords. The Death Guard warriors fought with the grim determination of those who had embraced damnation, their plague-enhanced forms shrugging off wounds that would have felled lesser beings. Yet for every salamander they claimed, 2 of their number fell to the righteous fury of the loyalists. At the chamber's heart, suspended within a containment field that sparked with barely contained energy, hung the Song of Entropy. The drake-headed staff was a thing of terrible beauty, its crystalline shaft inscribed with runes that seemed to shift and change when observed directly. The dragon's head that crowned it was wrought from some impossible metal that absorbed light itself, creating a void in the air that spoke of entropy given form. As Dakir fought his way toward the artifact, trading bolter rounds with a plague champion whose armor bore the marks of 10,000 years of corruption, he caught sight of movement at the chamber's far entrance. Imperial yellow blazed in the emergency lighting as another force entered the fray, their bolt weapons speaking with disciplined precision that could only belong to one chapter. "Imperial fists, advancing on your position," came the clear voice of Captain Lysander over the Vox, his words cutting through the chaos of battle. "We stand with you against the traitors." The arrival of Imperial Fists' reinforcements turned the tide of battle decisively. Where the salamanders fought with the fury of dragon fire, the Sons of Dawn advanced with the inexorable precision of a siege engine, their coordinated fire cutting down the Chaos forces with mechanical efficiency. Within minutes, the last of the Death Guard had fallen. Their corrupted forms finally granted the peace of true death. Captain Lysander removed his helm as he approached Dakir, revealing features that bore the stoic determination for which his chapter was renowned. "Brother Captain, we received fragmentary reports of your quest through astropathic channels. Weapons capable of permanently destroying the servants of chaos are too valuable to remain in the hands of a single chapter, no matter how honored." Dakir bristled at the implication, but before he could respond, the containment field around the Song of Entropy began to fail. Ancient systems, damaged by the battle's violence, sparked and died with mechanical finality. The artifact dropped toward the deck, and both captains moved simultaneously to claim it. It was Dakir whose gauntlets closed around the staff first, and immediately he understood why his Primarch had named it the Song of Entropy. Power flowed through his being like ice-cold fire, and with that power came knowledge. The drake-headed staff was not merely a weapon, but an instrument of fundamental dissolution, capable of unmaking the very bonds that held matter and energy in their ordained patterns. As if summoned by the artifact's activation, the space around them began to tear. A lesser demon of Sinch materialized from the immaterium, its crystalline form wreathed in flames that burned with colors that had no names. The creature's arrival sent waves of psychic force through the chamber, causing both salamanders and Imperial Fists to stagger under its alien presence. "The Song of Ending belongs to my master," the demon hissed, its voice echoing from dimensions beyond mortal perception. "Surrender what you have claimed, mortals, and I will grant you swift dissolution rather than eternal torment." Dakir's response came in the form of the Song of Entropy's activation. The Drakehead's jaws opened with silent majesty, and from them poured a beam of pure negation that struck the demon full in its crystalline core. Where the entropic energy touched, the creature's form did not simply disperse, but ceased to exist entirely. The very concept of its being was unraveled at the quantum level, leaving nothing behind but empty space and the echo of something that had never been. "By the throne," whispered Lysander, his enhanced senses struggling to process what he had witnessed. That was not banishment. That was true destruction. The implications of what they had seen hung heavy in the recycled air of the ancient chamber. If Vulkan's artifacts possessed such power, then the balance of the eternal war between order and chaos could be fundamentally altered. No longer would the servants of the dark gods retreat to the warp when defeated, only to return stronger than before. With weapons like the Song of Entropy, true victory might finally be possible. "This changes everything," Lysander continued, his tactical mind already processing the strategic implications. "The other chapters must be informed. If similar artifacts exist, then coordinated efforts to locate them become a matter of imperial survival." Dakir nodded slowly, understanding that the secret of their quest could no longer be contained. The Song of Entropy pulsed with quiet power in his hands, its weight somehow both greater and lesser than physics would suggest. "The Forge Father will not be pleased with the compromise of operational security. But you speak truth, brother. This war can be won, but not by any single chapter acting alone." As they prepared to extract from the space hulk, Lysander detailed his own forces to assist in the operation. The Imperial Fists had come seeking rumors of anti-chaos weapons, but they would leave as allies in a quest that dwarfed any single campaign. Word would spread through the Loyalist chapters now, carried by battle brothers who had witnessed the impossible with their own eyes. The journey back to Nocturne proceeded under the protection of both Salamanders and Imperial Fists vessels, a small fleet that spoke to the growing cooperation between chapters that had maintained separate paths for millennia. Astropathic messages winged their way across the galaxy, carrying word of success and alliance to those who needed to know. On the bridge of the Fireborn, Dakir composed his report to Forge Father Haystan with careful precision. The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning, for they marked a fundamental shift in the nature of their quest. To Vulkan Haystan, Forge Father of the Salamanders, from Captain Dakir of the Fifth Company, the Song of Entropy has been recovered successfully. Its power exceeds all projections, capable of permanently destroying both material and immaterial entities. Be advised, Imperial Fist's forces under Captain Lysander have requested coordination in future operations. The secret of our quest can no longer be maintained. Recommend immediate consultation regarding inter-chapter cooperation protocols. The fire that burns chaos forever spreads to willing hands. As the message departed for Nocturne, carried by the fastest astropath in the combined fleet, both captains stood in the Fireborn's observation deck and watched the space hulk Perdition's Crown disappear into the darkness behind them. Somewhere within that twisted mass of metal and madness, the echoes of their battle still rang through empty corridors, testament to a victory that had cost them secrecy, but gained them allies. Two artifacts now rested in Salamander hands, their combined power a beacon of hope in a galaxy that had known only endless war for 10,000 years. Two more remained to be claimed, and with each success, the forces arrayed against them would grow stronger and more desperate. Yet for the first time since the quest began, Dakir felt genuine optimism for their chances of success. The Imperial fists would not be the last to join their cause, and when all 9 artifacts were finally united, even the gods themselves would tremble before the returning Lord of Drakes. The Song of Entropy pulsed quietly in its containment field, patient and terrible and hungry for more servants of chaos to unmake. Soon it would sing again, and its melody would be one of absolute ending for the enemies of mankind. Deep within the space hulk they had left behind, ancient systems finally failed completely. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically, trapping the lingering traces of chaos corruption within chambers that would drift through the void for eternity. The battle for the Song of Entropy was over, but the war for Vulkan's legacy had only begun. The Charybdis system burned with the light of dying stars and the fire of ancient wars that had never truly ended. 3 worlds orbited a bloated red giant in decaying ellipses, each one scarred by conflicts that predated the Imperium itself. It was here, according to Vulkan Hestan's vision, that the obsidian chariot waited beneath layers of Xenos technology and the accumulated debris of 10,000 years of slaughter. Brother Captain Kayvon Stormheart stood upon the bridge of the strike cruiser, Draconis Rex, as it translated from the warp into real space, his enhanced vision immediately cataloguing the tactical situation that awaited them. The system was far from empty. Imperial vessels bearing the heraldry of 3 different chapters hung in the void like predators circling wounded prey, while further out, barely visible against the stellar radiation, shapes that registered as unknown to their cogitators drifted with alien purpose. "Multiple contacts across all sensor grids," reported Sergeant Therian, his scarred features grim with the knowledge of what such a convergence meant. "I count at least 2 other Imperial expeditions, and something else that the machine spirits cannot properly classify. Whatever lies on that world below, we are not the only ones who seek to claim it." The world in question hung before them like a wound against the stars, its surface a patchwork of crystalline structures and metallic pyramids that spoke of Necron presence. Yet scanners also detected Imperial ruins and what appeared to be Eldar Wraithbone constructs, creating an archaeological puzzle that defied easy understanding. Somewhere within that maze of overlapping civilizations lay the obsidian chariot, the 3rd of Vulkan's artifacts. As if summoned by their arrival, the Vox channels crackled with incoming transmissions. The first came bearing the heraldry of the Blood Angels, their crimson and gold iconography, marking them as the sons of Sanguinius. The second bore the iron skull of the Iron Hands, those grim warriors who had embraced the weakness of flesh. Both expeditions had clearly been drawn by the same fragmentary intelligence that had guided the salamanders to this place. "Salamander's vessel, this is Captain Rashan of the Blood Angels' 3rd Company," came the first transmission, the speaker's voice carrying the controlled fury for which his chapter was renowned. "We claim salvage rights to this system by virtue of first arrival. Withdraw immediately, or face the consequences of your defiance." The response from the Iron Hands was characteristically blunt. "This is Captain Vorthak of the Iron Hands' 5th Company. Your claim is invalid. We have detected technological signatures that fall under our jurisdiction as inheritors of the Omnissiah's will. Any interference will be met with appropriate force." Kayvon studied the tactical displays with growing unease. 3 Imperial expeditions, converging on a single location, spoke to intelligence sharing at levels that should not have been possible given the secrecy of their quest. Word of the artifact's power had spread further than anyone had anticipated, and now the galaxy's greatest warriors were prepared to shed each other's blood for the chance to claim Vulkan's legacy. "Open channels to both vessels," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of one who had never known defeat. "This is Captain Kayvon Stormheart of the Salamander's Second Company. We come not as rivals but as servants of the same cause. The artifact you seek is one of 9 relics left by my Primarch Vulkan. Its power has been confirmed to permanently destroy the servants of chaos. I propose coordination rather than conflict." The silence that followed stretched taut as a bowstring, broken only by the background hum of the ship's systems and the distant radiation of the dying star. When Captain Rashan finally responded, his voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "If what you claim is true, Salamander, then the stakes are higher than any of us realized. The Blood Angels have lost too many brothers to the predations of chaos to ignore such an opportunity." "Confirmed," came Vorthak's mechanical tones, enhanced by decades of augmetic implants. "Iron Hand's tactical doctrine supports cooperation in operations of this magnitude. We propose joint landing forces with coordination through established protocols." It was as Kayvon prepared to respond that the system's nature revealed itself in full. Reality tore open like fabric cut by invisible blades, and through the wounds in space-time poured a fleet of vessels that belonged to no mortal power. Chaos ships emerged from the immaterium, wreathed in flames that burned with impossible colors, their hulls twisted into configurations that hurt the mind to perceive directly. At their head sailed a vessel that registered on every psycher's awareness like a scream given form. The Photep's Vengeance, flagship of Magnus the Red, demon Primarch of the 1,000 Suns. Its arrival sent waves of psychic force through the system that caused lesser minds to bleed from their eyes and gibber in languages that predated human speech. "All Imperial vessels, this is an immediate tactical alert." Kayvon's voice cut through the psychic static that threatened to overwhelm their communications. "Traitor forces have entered the system. Magnus the Red himself leads them. All previous claims are suspended. We fight as one or we die as fools." The response from both Imperial expeditions was immediate and absolute. Whatever rivalries had existed moments before were swept aside by the presence of one of the arch-traitors themselves. Blood Angels and Iron Hands vessels moved into formation alongside the Salamanders, their combined firepower creating overlapping fields of death that would make any approach to the planet below a costly endeavor. Yet Magnus hadn't come unprepared. As the Loyalist fleet moved to establish orbital supremacy, the surface of the planet below erupted in volcanic fury. Not the natural volcanism of a living world, but the deliberate awakening of something that had slumbered for 65 million years. Necron tomb complexes began to phase into reality across the planet's surface, their Gorse weaponry already charging for the war that was to come. "By the throne," whispered Sergeant Therian, his enhanced vision tracking the emergence of dozens of massive constructs from beneath the planet's crust. Tomb ships. They must have been drawn by the psychic resonance of the Daemon fleet's arrival. The three-way battle that followed defied every tactical doctrine in the Codex Astartes. Imperial drop pods screamed through atmosphere thick with demonic manifestation and Necron gorse fire, their passengers disembarking into a hellscape where the laws of physics bent under the pressure of competing technologies. Salamanders, Blood Angels, and Iron Hands fought side by side through crystalline corridors that shifted their geometry with each passing moment, pursuing artifact signatures that led ever deeper into the planet's heart. It was Captain Rashan who first spotted the obsidian chariot, its form standing silent in a vast chamber that combined Necron architecture with structures that predated even their ancient civilization. The war machine was magnificent and terrible in equal measure, its armor plates forged from some impossible alloy that reflected light in patterns that suggested depth beyond dimension. Weapon systems of unknown purpose tracked their movement with mechanical precision, while its cockpit blazed with inner fire that spoke of systems still active after millennia of dormancy. "The machine spirit still lives," reported Iron Hands Techmarine Kellen, his augmetic scanners struggling to process readings that violated established principles of engineering. "Power sources are active and fully charged. Whatever force created this vessel built it to endure beyond the heat death of the universe itself." As they approached the chariot, the chamber erupted in violence. Thousand-sun sorcerers materialized from the immaterium itself, their forms wreathed in psychic fire and eldritch lightning. At their head strode a figure of terrible majesty, Magnus, the Red's favored demon prince, his form a shifting amalgamation of knowledge and mutation that belonged to no mortal plane. "Mortals," the demon prince spoke, its voice echoing from a dozen different dimensions simultaneously. "You seek to claim what belongs to the changer of ways. The obsidian chariot is a key to knowledge that predates your species. Surrender it willingly, and I will grant you the mercy of swift dissolution." The Space Marine's response came in the form of coordinated bolter fire that lit the ancient chamber with strobing muzzle flashes. Yet their rounds seemed to slow as they approached the thousand suns, caught in fields of temporal manipulation that turned seconds into hours and hours into heartbeats. Sorcerous lightning arced between the loyalists, seeking to burn them from within with mutagenic fire. It was then that the Necron Guardians activated. Dozens of immortals phased into reality throughout the chamber, their Gauss weaponry beginning the slow process of flaying matter at the molecular level. Their target priority protocols were clear: eliminate all organic entities within the tomb complex, regardless of faction or allegiance. The ancient war between order and chaos was irrelevant to beings who had transcended such petty concerns millions of years before either force had learned to manipulate reality. Caught between psychic fire and molecular disintegration, the Imperial forces fell back toward the obsidian chariot itself. It was Captain Kavon who made the desperate choice that would determine the battle's outcome. Ignoring the warnings of Iron Hands Techmarines and the protests of Blood Angels veterans, he leaped into the chariot's cockpit and began the activation sequence that his Primarch's vision had burned into his memory. The effect was immediate and profound. The obsidian chariot's armor blazed with light that belonged to no spectrum known to Imperial science, and a dome of absolute protection expanded outward from its position. Where it touched, demonic entities simply ceased to exist, their forms unraveled by forces that predated the birth of the Chaos Gods themselves. Necron Gauss weaponry struck the barrier and dissipated harmlessly, their molecular manipulation technology proving inadequate against defenses that operated on quantum principles beyond their understanding. "Impossible," gasped the demon prince, its form already beginning to waver as the chariot's influence expanded. "No mortal technology possesses such power. What manner of being could craft defenses against the fundamental forces of change itself?" Kavon's answer came through the chariot's Vox systems, his voice amplified by systems that had remained silent since the dark age of technology. "The Lord of Drakes, Father of the Salamanders, Guardian of humanity, you face the legacy of Vulkan, and it finds you wanting." The demon prince's destruction was not the violent unmaking that had characterized the previous artifact's effects, but something far more subtle and complete. The being simply faded from reality, as though it had never existed, its essence not destroyed, but prevented from ever having been. Around it, the thousand-sun sorcerers met similar fates, their connection to the warp severed by forces that recognized chaos as a fundamental error in reality's design. The Necron Immortals proved more resilient, their mechanical forms able to withstand the chariot's influence through sheer technological superiority. Yet they too withdrew, as their tactical protocols recognized a threat beyond their current capabilities to address. Phase drives activated across the chamber as the ancient guardians retreated to deeper levels, content to wait until the intruders departed before resuming their eternal vigil. In the sudden silence that followed, the three Imperial captains found themselves standing within the obsidian chariot's protective field, surrounded by the scattered remains of enemies that had threatened to overwhelm them through sheer numbers. The artifact's power was undeniable, its capabilities surpassing even the most optimistic projections of what Vulkan's legacy might contain. "This changes the nature of warfare itself," said Captain Vorthak, his enhanced visual systems recording every detail of the chariot's construction for future analysis. A single vehicle capable of providing absolute protection against both psychic and molecular attack. If such technology could be reverse-engineered— "The knowledge dies with us if necessary," Kayvon interrupted firmly. "This is not merely advanced technology, but a relic of our Primarch, imbued with his essence and purpose. It cannot be replicated, because it was never built through purely mechanical means." Captain Rashan nodded agreement, his warrior's instincts recognizing truths that transcended technical analysis. "The Blood Angels pledge support to your quest, Brother Captain. What we have witnessed here proves that the stakes reach beyond any single chapter's concerns. How many more artifacts remain to be claimed?" "One," Kayvon replied, his hand still resting on the chariot's control systems. "The Unbound Flame, greatest and most dangerous of our Primarch's creations. When all 9 are brought together, Vulkan will return to lead humanity in the final war against chaos." As they prepared to extract from the planet's surface, taking the obsidian chariot with them through methods that would require the combined expertise of all 3 chapters, astropathic messages began winging their way across the galaxy. Word of the battle would spread through both Imperial and Chaos intelligence networks, marking the quest for Vulkan's artifacts as a priority that transcended all other concerns. The temporary alliance forged in the fires of desperate battle would become something more permanent, a coalition of chapters united in purpose and tested in combat. Yet even as hope blazed bright in the hearts of the Loyalists, darker forces were already moving to prevent the completion of their quest. In the deepest reaches of the Immaterium, beings of immense power stirred with newfound concern. The obsidian chariot's activation had sent shockwaves through the warp that spoke of fundamental changes in the cosmic balance. If Vulkan's artifacts could provide absolute protection against their influence, then the eternal war between order and chaos faced a variable that had not existed for 65 million years. The race for the final artifact had begun in earnest, and the fate of the galaxy would be decided by whoever reached it first. In the void above Charybdis, 3 Imperial fleets prepared for the journey to their final destination, carrying with them hope that had not existed since the dark days of the Horus Heresy. Yet hope alone would not be enough to face what awaited them in the darkness between the stars, where the unbound flame drifted in isolation, guarded by secrets that even its creator had feared to unleash upon an unprepared universe. The Ghoul stars held secrets that predated the Imperium itself, their light twisted by forces that belonged to no mortal understanding of physics. Here, in the void between galaxies where reality grew thin and nightmares took physical form, drifted the remnants of expeditions that had ventured too far into darkness and paid the ultimate price for their curiosity. It was in this forsaken region that Vulkan Hestan led the combined Imperial fleet toward their final destination. Following coordinates burned into his soul, by visions that grew stronger with each passing hour. The fire drakes of his personal guard stood at ready positions throughout the strike cruiser, Forge Eternal, their ancient Terminator armor gleaming with sacred oils and blessed inscriptions. Behind them sailed the vessels of 3 chapters united in common cause: Salamanders, Blood Angels, and Iron Hands, their combined firepower representing one of the largest cooperative Imperial operations undertaken in recent memory. "Contact bearing 27 Mark 6, reported Sergeant Vulkan, his enhanced senses tracking movement at the very edge of scanner range. Configuration unknown, but the hull signature matches archaic Imperial patterns. It appears to be drifting without power." Histan studied the tactical display with growing anticipation and dread. The vessel that appeared on their screens was ancient beyond measure, its design predating even the Great Crusade itself. Yet along its hull, barely visible beneath millennia of cosmic dust and micrometeorite impacts, blazed the salamander icon of their chapter. This was one of their own ships, launched into the void so long ago that even their most sacred records had lost track of its fate. "The Iron Dragon," whispered Chaplain Elysius, his augmetic voice box struggling to process the significance of what they beheld. "Lost during the early years of M31, dispatched on a mission so secret that even the chapter archives speak of it only in whispers. It was to carry a cargo of utmost importance beyond the reach of any enemy. The Unbound Flame, Vulkan's original stasis casket, the device that had once held their Primarch's broken form after his sacrifice during the War of the Beast. The vision had shown Histan this moment with perfect clarity. The final artifact waiting in the darkness, protected by 10,000 years of isolation and the loyalty of the dead. Yet even as their fleet approached the derelict vessel, reality began to convulse around them. The immaterium tore open like wounds in the fabric of existence, disgorging ships that belonged to the darkest chapters of Imperial history. Chaos vessels emerged from the warp with hulls twisted by demonic influence and weapons that fired projectiles made of crystallized hatred itself. At their head sailed a vessel that made even veteran space marines whisper prayers of protection. The Vengeful Spirit's Shadow, flagship of a Chaos Lord whose name had been struck from all Imperial records, but whose power rivaled that of the demon Primarchs themselves. Its arrival sent waves of psychic terror through both Imperial and Chaos forces alike, marking this battle as one that would determine the fate of the galaxy itself. "All vessels, this is Forge Father Histan." His voice cut through the growing psychic storm with the authority of absolute faith. "Whatever the cost, the Unbound Flame mustn't fall into enemy hands. Captain Lysander, take your Imperial Fist's vessels and establish a defensive perimeter. Captains Russian and Vorthak, coordinate boarding actions against the derelict. We end this here, or humanity dies screaming in the dark." The space battle that followed eclipsed every naval engagement fought since the Gothic War. Lance batteries carved burning lines across the void, while torpedo volleys exploded in flowers of atomic fire that briefly outshone the distant stars. Imperial vessels fought with the desperate fury of those who knew that defeat meant more than death. It meant the end of hope itself. Yet through it all, Histan led a select force of fire drakes aboard the Iron Dragon, following scanner readings that led them deep into the vessel's heart. The ship's corridors told stories of ancient sacrifice, their walls scarred by weapon fire from battles fought in the dark age of technology. Emergency lumens flickered with dying light, casting shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. At the ship's heart lay the Sanctum Sanctorum, a chamber that had been sealed since the day the Iron Dragon departed Nocturne. Within its adamantium walls, suspended in a stasis field that hummed with power beyond imperial understanding, waited the unbound flame. The artifact was magnificent and terrible in equal measure, its form shifting between states of matter as though it existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions. As Histan approached the stasis containment unit, the artifact began to pulse with inner light that spoke directly to his gene-enhanced soul. This was more than mere technology. It was a prison and a cradle, a device that had once held the physical form of his primarch, while his consciousness wandered the immaterium in search of understanding that no mortal mind could encompass. My son. The voice came not through the Vox channels, but directly into Histan's consciousness, warm as the forge fires of Nocturne, and deep as the planet's molten core. You have done well. All 9 artifacts are within reach, and the time of awakening draws near. The Forge Father fell to one knee before the stasis field, tears streaming down his scarred cheeks as he beheld the psychic manifestation of his gene sire. Vulkan appeared as he remembered from the chapter's most sacred hololiths, tall and powerful, his skin bearing the ritual scarring of Nocturne's fire trials, his eyes blazing with compassion and determination in equal measure. "Father," Histan whispered, his voice breaking with 10,000 years of accumulated grief and hope. "We have searched for so long. The chapter has never wavered in its faith, never stopped believing in your return. Faith has been rewarded, faithful Histan," Vulkan replied, his form becoming more solid as the stasis field began to fail under the pressure of his awakening consciousness. But the final trial lies ahead. When the 9 artifacts are brought together, when the ritual of my making is complete, I will return to physical form with power enough to face the darkness that threatens all humanity. Yet know this, my resurrection will not go unopposed. The vision that followed struck Histan with the force of a nova's birth. He saw the 4 chaos gods stirring in their eternal domains, their attention focused with malevolent intensity upon the growing resonance of Vulkan's return. Corn-sharpened weapons that could cut the bonds between soul and flesh, Nurgle-brewed plagues that could corrupt even a Primarch's enhanced physiology, Slanesh-crafted temptations designed to turn virtue into vice, and Tzeentch wove schemes within schemes, seeking to pervert the ritual itself into an instrument of damnation. The moment I return to flesh, all 4 will move against us simultaneously. Vulkan's voice carried the weight of prophecy itself. They understand that my artifacts represent a genuine threat to their eternal dominion. The weapons I forged can unmake their servants permanently, deny them the endless cycle of death and rebirth that has sustained their power for millennia. Histan struggled to process the magnitude of what he was being told. "Father, if the danger is so great, perhaps we should delay the ritual until—" "No," Vulkan interrupted, with gentle firmness. "Delay serves only our enemies. Even now, chaos forces mass to prevent my return. The window of opportunity grows narrow with each passing moment. You must gather the artifacts immediately and begin the ritual upon Nocturne itself. Only there, where the salamander's flame burns eternal, can the resurrection be completed safely." As if summoned by their conversation, the chamber's walls shuddered under the impact of enemy weapons. The Chaos forces had boarded the Iron Dragon, their corrupted forms seeking to claim the unbound flame for their dark masters. Through the ship's corridors echoed sounds that belonged to no mortal throat. The roars of demons given flesh, and the screams of space marines whose souls were being flayed from their bodies by warp-spawned horrors. "The instructions for the ritual are encoded within the Tome of Fire," Vulkan continued, his form beginning to fade as the stasis field collapsed entirely. 9 artifacts arranged in the pattern of the salamander's flame, each one channeling power through crystalline matrices that will serve as anchor points for my consciousness. When the final incantation is spoken, when the last seal is broken, I will return with capabilities that will reshape the nature of warfare itself. The unbound flame dropped into Hestan's waiting hands, and immediately he felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settle upon his shoulders. The artifact pulsed with warmth that penetrated even his enhanced physiology, carrying within its core the essence of his Primarch's immortal soul. 9 artifacts, gathered from across the galaxy at tremendous cost in blood and sacrifice, would finally serve their intended purpose. Go now, my son. Vulkan's voice echoed one final time before fading into memory. Return to Nocturne with all speed. The ritual must be completed before the enemy can marshal effective opposition. Tell my sons that their father remembers their service, and that soon they will stand beside him once more in the war against darkness. The fighting withdrawal from the Iron Dragon proved as costly as any battle in the chapter's history. Chaos forces threw themselves against the salamanders with the fury of the damned, their corrupted forms enhanced by demonic possession and warp-spawned mutation. Yet the knowledge that they carried their Primarch's final artifact gave the Loyalists strength beyond mortal endurance, and they carved a path through their enemies with bolter and blade. As the Imperial fleet prepared for emergency warp translation back to Nocturne, Hestan stood in the Forge Eternal's observation deck and watched the Iron Dragon's final moments. Chaos forces swarmed over its hull like carrion feeders, seeking any trace of the artifact that had eluded their grasp. When nuclear fire finally consumed the ancient vessel, taking thousands of traitors with it, the Forge Father felt a moment of satisfaction amid the overwhelming grief of loss. The astropathic message that winged its way toward Nocturne carried news that would shake the chapter to its foundations. The quest was complete. All 9 artifacts were secured. The time of Vulkan's return had finally arrived. Yet even as hope blazed bright in the hearts of the salamanders, darker preparations were already underway across the galaxy. Chaos champions received visions of a threat that surpassed all previous concerns. Demon princes marshaled hosts that had not walked the material plane for millennia. The 4 gods themselves stirred from their eternal conflicts to focus unified attention upon a single world where salamanders dwelt and ancient fires burned. The race was no longer about finding artifacts or preventing their discovery. Now it was about time itself, whether Vulkan could be restored before his enemies could prevent the ritual's completion. In the deepest vaults of Nocturne, sacred chambers that had waited 10,000 years for this moment began to stir with anticipation. Ancient machinery awakened from millennial slumber. Forge priests studied texts so sacred that speaking their contents aloud could drive lesser minds to madness. The Tome of Fire blazed with inner light as its encoded instructions prepared to guide the most important ritual in the chapter's history. Soon, very soon, the Lord of Drakes would return to reclaim his place among the living. Whether the galaxy would survive his resurrection remained to be seen. But for the first time since the dark days of the Horus heresy, the servants of humanity had reason to hope that victory might actually be possible. The unbound flame pulsed quietly in its containment field, patient and terrible, and filled with the dreams of a sleeping god who would soon wake to find his children had never forgotten their duty. The final phase of the greatest quest in Imperial history was about to begin, and the fate of every living soul in the galaxy hung in the balance. Across the void, reality itself held its breath as forces beyond mortal comprehension prepared for a confrontation that would determine whether hope or despair would shape the future of all creation. The sacred chambers beneath Mount Deathfire had waited 10,000 years for this moment, their adamantium walls inscribed with prophecies that few had dared to believe would ever be fulfilled. Now, as Vulkan Hestan descended into the deepest sanctum with his precious cargo, the very stones seemed to pulse with anticipation. The 9 artifacts of his primarch, scattered across the galaxy for millennia to prevent their combined power from falling into enemy hands, were finally coming home. Chapter Master Tushan walked beside the Forge Father, his ancient armor bearing the battle honors of 3 centuries of warfare. Behind them came the most senior officers of the chapter, each one bearing witness to a moment that would echo through eternity. The weight of their responsibility pressed upon them like the mountain above, for they carried not merely relics of immense power, but the keys to their Primarch's resurrection. "The Tome of Fire has been consulted," Tushan reported, his voice heavy with the gravity of what they were about to attempt. "The ritual requirements are complex beyond measure, demanding precise placement of each artifact according to patterns that predate the Imperium itself. One error, one miscalculation, and the accumulated power could tear Nocturne itself apart." Histan nodded grimly as they reached the chamber that would serve as the focal point for their Primarch's return. The space was vast beyond imagining, its walls carved with salamander motifs that seemed to writhe and dance in the flickering light of eternal flames. At its center lay a 9-pointed star inscribed directly into the volcanic bedrock, each point marking the position where one of Vulkan's artifacts would rest during the ritual of awakening. "Begin the placement," Histan commanded, his voice echoing through the sacred chamber. The spear of Vulkan at the northern point, representing the fires of creation. Kessere's mantle at the northeastern position, symbolizing protection through sacrifice. The gauntlet of the forge at the eastern point, embodying the strength to shape destiny itself. One by one, the artifacts took their appointed positions. The engine of woes, its dark energies contained within specialized crystalline matrices. The song of entropy, its drake-headed form pointing toward the chamber's heart. The obsidian chariot, reduced to portable components that would serve as anchor points for its vast protective capabilities. Each relic hummed with power as it found its place in the ancient pattern, their combined resonance creating harmonics that penetrated the very foundations of reality. As the ritual arrangement neared completion, Nocturne itself began to respond. Seismic instruments throughout the planet registered tremors that followed no natural pattern, while the aurora that danced above the northern polar regions blazed with colors that had never been seen before. In the deepest lava tubes beneath Mount Deathfire, substances that had remained stable for millions of years began to transmute into forms that violated every law of physics. The astropathic calls had been sent across the galaxy weeks earlier, summoning every successor chapter that claimed descent from Vulkan's gene line. Now they began to arrive in response to the Forge Father's sacred command. The Storm Lords translated into Nocturne's system with their full strength deployed, their scarred vessels bearing the marks of countless campaigns fought in their Primarch's name. The Black Dragons followed, their mutation-blessed warriors eager to stand beside their progenitors in the hour of destiny. Iron Drakes, Dragon Spears, Fire Lords, dozens of chapters that had never fought together, now gathered in the void above Nocturne, their combined might representing one of the largest concentrations of space marine power assembled since the Great Crusade itself. Each brought their own interpretation of their Primarch's teachings, their own understanding of what it meant to be sons of Vulkan, yet all were united by the promise of his return. It was as the final artifacts were being positioned that the most unexpected arrival occurred, reality tore open at the edge of the nocturne system, and through the wound in space-time emerged a fleet bearing heraldry that had not been seen for centuries. Ultramarines' vessels in full battle array, their pristine hulls gleaming with fresh blessing oils, and their weapon batteries charged for immediate action. At their head sailed the mighty Macrage's Honor, and aboard its command deck stood a figure whose presence sent shockwaves through every Imperial force in the system. Robert Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, had awakened from his death-like slumber and come to witness his brother's return. "Impossible," whispered Chaplain Elysius, his augmetic systems struggling to process what his sensors were reporting. "The Lord of Macragge has been in stasis for 10,000 years. What force could have roused him from his eternal vigil?" The answer came through astropathic channels, as clear as cathedral bells, Guilliman's thoughts reaching across the void with the authority of one who had helped build the Imperium itself. "Brother Hastan, I felt the resonance of Vulkan's awakening consciousness across half the galaxy. The combination of his artifacts creates psychic pressure waves that penetrate even the deepest stasis fields. If my brother returns to fight beside us once more, then the Ultramarines stand ready to support his resurrection." The implications of Guilliman's premature awakening sent tremors through both Imperial and Chaos command structures across the galaxy. On distant worlds, astropaths collapsed as they struggled to process the psychic shockwaves generated by a second Primarch, stirring to consciousness. In the Eye of Terror, demon princes that had not felt fear for millennia began to experience the unfamiliar sensation of genuine concern. Yet even as hope blazed bright in the hearts of the Loyalists, darker preparations were underway throughout the system. Chaos forces had been massing for weeks, drawn by the same psychic resonance that had awakened Guilliman. Now they moved from concealment, revealing the true scope of the threat arrayed against Vulkan's return. Dozens of Chaos vessels emerged from the warp at strategic points throughout the Nocturne system, their hulls twisted by millennia of exposure to demonic influence. At their head sailed ships that bore the heraldry of all four Chaos gods, marking this as a unified response to a threat that transcended their eternal conflicts. Word-bearers' vessels sailed alongside Iron Warriors, their ancient rivalries set aside in the face of an enemy that could unmake their very existence. Most terrifying of all were the vessels that bore no mortal crew whatsoever. Demon ships wreathed in warp flame and crewed by entities that existed only through sheer malevolent will, their very presence in real space causing reality to buckle and twist in patterns that hurt the mind to perceive. These were not raids or reconnaissance forces, but the vanguard of an invasion that sought nothing less than the prevention of Vulkan's resurrection. In the ritual chamber beneath Mount Deathfire, the final artifact found its place in the ancient pattern. The unbound flame settled into the arrangement's heart, its crystalline core beginning to pulse with rhythms that matched the heartbeat of Nocturne itself. As it did, the chamber filled with light that belonged to no spectrum known to Imperial science, and every space marine present felt their Primarch's presence like a flame kindled in their souls. "It begins," Hastan announced, his voice carrying absolute certainty despite the magnitude of what they attempted. "The ritual cannot be stopped once commenced. Whatever forces mass against us, whatever horrors seek to prevent our father's return, we will stand firm. This is our watch, our moment, our sacred duty." Above them, the mountain itself began to resonate as harmonics from the artifact arrangement propagated through its structure. Emergency seismic stations across a Nocturne registered readings that surpassed every previous recorded event, while atmospheric monitoring devices detected energy patterns that suggested fundamental alterations to the laws of physics within the ritual site's vicinity. The Allied fleet in orbit adopted defensive positions as Chaos forces closed to engagement range, their combined firepower creating overlapping fields of death that would make any approach to Nocturne a costly endeavor. Yet even as the first torpedo volleys began to streak across the void, both sides knew that this battle would be decided not by naval superiority, but by whether the ritual could be completed before the enemy could prevent it. Guillemon's voice echoed through the vox channels of every loyalist vessel, his words carrying the weight of supreme command and the wisdom of one who had helped forge the Imperium from the ashes of old night. Sons of Vulkan, sons of Dawn, sons of Sanguinius, today we witness the return of hope itself. Whatever the cost, whatever the sacrifice, we will not allow the darkness to extinguish the light of our brother's resurrection. For the Emperor, for the Imperium, for the future of all mankind. In the deepest chambers of Mount Deathfire, reality itself began to bend as the 9 artifacts achieved perfect harmonic resonance. The pattern inscribed in volcanic bedrock blazed with inner fire, while the walls themselves seemed to become translucent, revealing vistas of other times and distant places where similar rituals had once been attempted. This was power beyond imperial comprehension, technology that bridged the gap between science and sorcery, between the material and the divine. The Tome of Fire blazed with letters of living flame as its encoded instructions guided the ritual's progression. Each word spoken by the assembled chaplains sent ripples through the immaterium, while every gesture made by the ritual's participants added layers of complexity to patterns that were reshaping the fundamental nature of reality within the chamber's confines. Yet even as the ritual approached its crucial phase, the forces of chaos prepared their own countermeasures. In the void above Nocturne, greater demons began to manifest in numbers not seen since the darkest days of the Horus heresy. Bloodthirsters materialized alongside lords of change, their ancient rivalries set aside in the face of a threat that could permanently alter the cosmic balance between order and chaos. The final phase of preparation was complete. 9 artifacts of immeasurable power arranged in perfect harmony, their combined energies focused on a single purpose that had been 10,000 years in the making. Around them, reality warped and twisted as forces beyond mortal comprehension prepared to birth a god of war back into the physical realm. The return of Vulkan was no longer a distant hope, but an imminent reality. Whether the galaxy would survive his resurrection remained to be seen, but for the first time since the dark days of the heresy, the servants of the Emperor had reason to believe that victory might actually be within reach. In the growing light of the ritual chamber, shadows danced that belonged to beings not yet born and futures not yet written. The moment of truth approached, and with it would come either the dawn of a new golden age or the final extinction of hope in a universe consumed by eternal war. The fire of creation burned bright in the heart of Mount Deathfire, and soon it would blaze forth to illuminate a galaxy that had forgotten what it meant to truly hope for tomorrow. The moment of truth arrived with the silence that precedes avalanches, when all creation holds its breath before forces too vast for mortal comprehension reshape the very foundations of reality. In the ritual chamber beneath Mount Deathfire, the 9 artifacts of Vulkan achieved perfect harmonic resonance, their combined energies creating patterns of light and shadow that belonged to no known spectrum of existence. Vulkan Hastan spoke the final words of the ancient incantation, his voice echoing through dimensions that existed beyond the boundaries of normal space-time. The tome of fire blazed with letters that burned themselves into the fabric of reality, while the volcanic bedrock beneath their feet transmitted power that originated not from Nocturne's core, but from the fundamental forces that bound the galaxy together. Reality convulsed. At the center of the nine-pointed star, where energies older than the Imperium focused their accumulated might, the air began to tear. Not the violent rending that marked demonic incursion, but something infinitely more profound. The careful unfolding of dimensional barriers that had been designed to contain a force too great for any single realm to hold. Through the growing aperture came light that did not illuminate, but purified, fire that burned away falsehood rather than consuming matter. And through that fire stepped Vulkan, Primarch of the Salamanders, Lord of Drakes, Guardian of humanity. He stood nearly 3 meters in height, his form restored not merely to its original magnificence, but enhanced by the decade of millennia his consciousness had spent learning the deepest secrets of creation itself. His skin bore the ritual scarring of Nocturne's fire trials, each mark now blazing with inner light that spoke of power beyond mortal understanding. Upon his shoulders rested the mantle of absolute authority, while in his hands materialized weapons forged in the heart of dying stars and tempered in the tears of gods. The moment his feet touched the sacred ground of his homeworld, the change was immediate and absolute. The warp storms that had raged across the Nocturne system for weeks simply ceased, their chaotic energies unable to maintain coherence in the presence of one whose very existence served as an anchor point for ordered reality. For light years in every direction, the Immaterium calmed to levels of stability not seen since the golden age of the Great Crusade. "My sons," Vulkan's voice carried the warmth of forge fires and the strength of adamantium, each word resonating through the chambers with harmonics that spoke directly to the gene-enhanced souls of every space marine present. "I have returned." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of warriors dropping to their knees, their enhanced physiology overwhelmed by proximity to their genetic progenitor. Tears streamed down faces that had not known such emotion since their transformation into angels of death, while hearts that had beaten for centuries in service to humanity now thundered with joy too pure for mortal expression. Vulkan Hestan was the first to find his voice, though it cracked with the weight of 10,000 years of accumulated grief and hope. "My lord, my gene-sire, my father, we never stopped believing. The chapter has maintained the watch, protected the innocent, kindled the flame of hope, even in the darkest hours." "I know, faithful Hestan." Vulkan approached the Forge Father with steps that left glowing footprints in the volcanic stone, reaching down to lift his chosen son to his feet with hands that radiated paternal affection. "Your service has been witnessed across the galaxy, your sacrifice noted by forces that dwell beyond the veil of stars. The Salamanders have proven themselves worthy inheritors of my legacy." As father and son embraced, the artifacts around them pulsed with renewed vigor, their combined energies now flowing through Vulkan himself to enhance capabilities that had already transcended mortal limitations. The spear of Vulkan materialized in his grip without conscious summoning, while Kessere's mantle settled upon his shoulders as though it had never been separated from its rightful owner. Each artifact added layers of power to abilities that were already approaching the divine. Yet even as joy filled the hearts of his sons, darker forces were stirring in response to his return. Above Nocturne, the massive Chaos Fleet that had been held in check by the combined Imperial forces suddenly surged forward with the fury of the damned. demon engines screamed through the void, while lesser demons manifested directly aboard loyalist vessels, their forms wreathed in warp fire and sustained by the desperate hatred of their patron gods. "The enemy comes in force," reported Chapter Master Tushan through the Vox channels, his voice tight with the strain of coordinating defenses against an assault that defied every tactical doctrine. Dozens of greater demons manifesting simultaneously. Whatever power blocked their access to the system has been overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Vulkan's response came not through words, but through action that demonstrated the true scope of his restored capabilities. With a gesture that seemed almost casual, he extended his consciousness beyond the confines of Mount Deathfire, reaching through layers of rock and atmosphere to touch the minds of every loyal warrior in the system. When he spoke, his voice echoed in the thoughts of Imperial defenders, from the lowliest servitor to Robot Gilliman himself, sons of the Imperium, warriors of humanity, guardians of hope itself. Bear witness to the return of the fire that burns eternal. I am Vulkan, and I have come home not to rest, but to lead you in the final war against darkness. Today, we prove that chaos can be defeated, not merely banished, and that the future belongs to those who fight for something greater than themselves. The effect of his declaration rippled across the battlefield like a shockwave, filling every Imperial heart with courage, while striking terror into the ranks of their enemies. Space Marines who had been falling back before overwhelming demon numbers suddenly surged forward with renewed fury, their bolters speaking with the voice of righteousness itself. Naval gunners who had been conserving ammunition opened fire with reckless abandon, confident that their Primarch's return guaranteed ultimate victory. Yet it was not words alone that turned the tide of battle. As the first greater demon materialized within Mount Deathfire itself, seeking to strike at Vulkan before his power could fully stabilize, the returned Primarch demonstrated capabilities that redefined what was possible even for one of his enhanced stature. The demon was a lord of change, of immense power, its crystalline form wreathed in flames that burned with the collected wisdom of civilizations it had corrupted across the millennia. Its arrival sent waves of mutagenic force through the chamber, seeking to transform the loyal Space Marines into twisted parodies of their former selves. Yet where that energy touched Vulkan's presence, it simply ceased to exist, unraveled at the quantum level by forces that recognized chaos as a fundamental violation of natural law. "Impossible," the demon hissed, its voice echoing from dimensions that existed only in nightmare. "No mortal possesses power sufficient to deny the will of the great architect. What manner of being are you?" Vulkan's answer came in the form of fire that burned with colors that had no names, reaching out to envelop the demon's form with flames that did not consume, but purified. Where they touched, the creature's essence was not destroyed, but transformed back into the pure energy from which it had originally been corrupted. The Lord of Change's death scream was not one of agony, but of gratitude, as millennia of enforced service to malevolent gods finally came to an end. "I am what I have always been," Vulkan replied to the empty air where his enemy had stood moments before. "A guardian of humanity, a keeper of the sacred flame, a son who has finally come home to protect his family." The implications of what they had witnessed sent shockwaves through every observer. The demon had not been banished to the warp to eventually return stronger than before, but truly freed from the corruption that had bound it to chaos. If Vulkan's power could accomplish such transformations on a battlefield scale, then the eternal war itself might finally be brought to a conclusive end. As if summoned by the magnitude of the moment, Robot Gilliman himself arrived in the ritual chamber, his ultramarines escort maintaining respectful distance as the two Primarchs beheld each other for the first time in 10,000 years. The Lord of Macragga had changed during his millennia of stasis, his features bearing the weight of burdens that no mortal mind could fully comprehend, yet his eyes still blazed with the tactical brilliance that had helped build the Imperium itself. "Brother," Guilliman spoke, his voice carrying emotions too complex for simple words to convey. "When I felt your stirring consciousness across the galaxy, I dared not hope that it truly meant your return. Yet here you stand, not as memory or legend, but in flesh and bone and righteous fury." The embrace that followed was witnessed by hundreds of space marines from a dozen different chapters, marking a moment that would be remembered for as long as the Imperium endured. Two Primarchs, united once more in common cause after millennia of separation, their combined presence creating a nexus of hope that blazed across the galaxy like a newborn star. "The work is far from finished," Vulkan replied as they separated, his enhanced senses already cataloguing the tactical situation that awaited them beyond Nocturne's atmosphere. The enemy masses in numbers not seen since the darkest days of the heresy, while worlds across the galaxy cry out for deliverance from forces that have grown bold in our absence. But for the first time in 10,000 years, we possess the means to answer those cries with permanent victory rather than temporary respite. Even as they spoke, astropathic messages were winging their way across the galaxy, carrying news that would fundamentally alter the balance of power throughout Imperial space. On distant worlds, planetary governors who had despaired of ever seeing relief from chaos incursions suddenly found reason to hope. In fortress monasteries that had been reduced to skeleton crews by endless warfare, chapter masters began planning offensives that had been deemed impossible mere hours earlier. Yet the announcement of Vulkan's return also triggered responses from forces that had remained hidden for millennia. In the Eye of Terror, demon princes, who had not stirred from their domains since the Horus heresy, began marshalling hosts, not seen since the great betrayal itself. Ancient chaos champions thought destroyed during the scouring suddenly emerged from whatever dark corners they had been hiding in, their corrupted forms enhanced by 10,000 years of exposure to raw warp energy. The four chaos gods themselves stirred from their eternal conflicts, their attention focused with malevolent intensity upon a single world where salamanders dwelt and ancient fires burned. For the first time since the war in heaven, Khorne and Nurgle found themselves in agreement with Tzeentch and Slaanesh, united by recognition of a threat that transcended their individual ambitions. In the ritual chamber beneath Mount Deathfire, Vulkan stood surrounded by his sons and watched the tactical displays that showed enemy forces massing throughout the galaxy. His enhanced perception could see patterns within patterns, tracing the movements of fleets and the deployment of armies across light years of space with clarity that surpassed even the most sophisticated cogitator arrays. "They come in force," he observed, his voice carrying satisfaction rather than concern. "Good. For too long, the servants of chaos have hidden behind veils and struck from shadow, content to corrupt and withdraw rather than face decisive battle. Now they reveal themselves fully, committing forces that cannot be easily replaced. This will be their final gambit and our ultimate opportunity." The war for the galaxy's soul was about to begin in earnest, with a returned Primarch leading forces that had been blessed by proximity to power beyond mortal comprehension. Yet even Vulkan understood that victory would require more than enhanced abilities and unwavering courage. The enemy they faced had been preparing for this moment since his disappearance, marshalling resources and corruption that spanned millennia of careful planning. As reports continued to arrive of chaos fleets translating into imperial systems across the galaxy, The returned Lord of Drakes began issuing orders that would reshape the nature of warfare itself. No longer would Imperial forces fight to contain and delay, hoping merely to survive another day of endless conflict. Now they would strike with the fury of dragons unleashed, seeking not merely victory, but the permanent elimination of threats that had plagued humanity for far too long. The age of defensive warfare was ending. The time of the final offensive had begun, led by a Primarch whose return marked either the dawn of a new golden age or the final confrontation that would determine whether hope or despair would shape the future of all creation. In the depths of Mount Deathfire, the 9 artifacts pulsed with harmonized energy, their combined power flowing through their creator to enhance capabilities that were already approaching the divine. The ritual was complete, the resurrection accomplished, and the Lord of Drakes had returned to claim his place at the forefront of humanity's greatest war. Yet this was only the beginning. The real test would come when enhanced power met the full fury of chaos unleashed, when the forces of order and disorder clashed in battles that would determine the fate of every living soul in the galaxy. The returned Primarch was ready for that test, and so were the sons who had never stopped believing in his eventual return. The fire of hope burned bright once more, and it would not be extinguished again. The first strike of Vulkan's great campaign came not as the wild fury of dragons unleashed, but as the measured precision of a master craftsman applying his tools to flawed metal. From the command deck of his newly consecrated flagship, the Forgehammer Eternal, the returned Primarch studied tactical displays that showed chaos strongholds scattered across a dozen systems like infected wounds upon the galaxy's flesh. 3 weeks had passed since his resurrection, 3 weeks spent consolidating forces and planning campaigns that would reshape the nature of warfare itself. Imperial fleets gathered in numbers not seen since the Great Crusade, their combined might representing every loyal chapter that could answer the call to arms. Blood angels sailed alongside dark angels, while Imperial fists coordinated with iron hands in displays of cooperation that had been deemed impossible mere months earlier. "Target selection complete," reported Captain Lysander, his Imperial Fist's tactical expertise having proven invaluable in planning the offensive operations. 17 primary Chaos strongholds identified across the Segmentum Solar, each one representing a critical node in their supply and communication networks. Simultaneous strikes will prevent coordinated response while maximizing psychological impact. Vulkan nodded approval as he studied the hololithic displays, his enhanced perception tracing patterns of corruption that extended far beyond mere military installations. Where mortals saw fortified worlds and demon engines, he perceived the underlying network of warp connections that sustained chaos influence across vast regions of space. His artifacts pulsed with quiet anticipation, their combined energies already reaching across the void to test the strength of barriers that separated real space from the immaterium. "The enemy has grown complacent," he observed, his voice carrying the authority of one who had helped build the Imperium from its very foundations. "For 10,000 years, they have faced defenders who could only contain and delay, never truly eradicate. They have forgotten what it means to face an enemy capable of permanent victory." The first target was a fortress world in the Mordian subsector, its surface transformed into a hellscape of brass citadels and demon forges, where corrupted tech priests labored to create weapons that violated every law of physics. For centuries, Imperial forces had attempted to reclaim the planet, only to find their victories turned to ash as banished demons returned stronger than before and purged corruption simply regenerated from warp energy. Vulkan's approach was fundamentally different. Rather than attempting to storm the fortress directly, he positioned his fleet at maximum bombardment range and activated the Engine of Woes for the first time since its recovery from Mordax. The artifact's dark energies reached across the void like invisible fingers, seeking out the quantum foundations that anchored demonic manifestations to physical reality. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the forces of chaos. Across the fortress world's surface, greater demons that had ruled their domains for millennia simply ceased to exist, their essences not banished, but permanently severed from the warp itself. Demon engines collapsed into piles of mundane metal as the malevolent intelligences that powered them were unraveled at the molecular level. Within hours, a world that had been lost to chaos for 6 centuries was cleansed more thoroughly than any previous Imperial offensive had achieved in decades of costly warfare. "Impossible," whispered Chaplain Grimoldus, his voice carrying awe that bordered on religious reverence. "The corruption is not merely suppressed, but eliminated entirely. The very soil itself has been purified of warp taint." Yet Vulkan was not content with mere purification. As Imperial landing forces secured the planet's surface, he descended to walk among the ruins of the demon forges, the song of entropy blazing in his grip like a beacon of absolute order. Where his feet touched corrupted ground, life began to return. Twisted metal straightened itself into forms that served constructive rather than destructive purposes. Poisoned air cleared as molecular bonds reasserted patterns that promoted growth rather than decay. "Behold," the Primarch declared, as his power flowed through the planetary crust itself, reaching down to touch tectonic plates that had been warped by millennia of chaos influence. "This is not merely conquest, but restoration. We do not simply drive out darkness. We replace it with light that can never be extinguished." The transformation continued for days as Vulkan's presence worked, changes that defied every principle of Imperial doctrine. Forge temples rose from the ruins of demon strongholds, their sacred fires burning with flames that could sanctify metal and purify souls with equal effectiveness. The planet's population, long since fled or corrupted beyond redemption, was replaced by colonists drawn from overcrowded hive worlds, their gratitude creating bonds of loyalty that would endure for generations. Word of the victory spread across the galaxy with speed that defied conventional astropathic transmission. On distant worlds where Imperial defenders had fought hopeless holding actions for decades, PDF commanders suddenly found reason to believe that victory might actually be possible. In fortress monasteries, where chapter masters had long ago abandoned offensive operations in favor of desperate defense, new battle plans began taking shape around concepts that had been dismissed as fantasy mere weeks earlier. The second target was chosen for its symbolic significance rather than strategic value. Cadia's moon, Khazar Kryn, had fallen to a combined chaos invasion 3 decades earlier, its surface transformed into a staging ground for raids against the fortress world itself. Multiple Imperial attempts to retake the moon had failed, as demon reinforcements poured through warp rifts that remained permanently open despite every effort to close them. Vulkan's solution demonstrated capabilities that redefined what was possible even for a Primarch enhanced by artifacts of immeasurable power. Rather than attempting to assault the demon strongholds directly, he focused the combined energies of his 9 artifacts on the warp rifts themselves, applying forces that operated on quantum principles far beyond Imperial understanding. The rifts did not simply close, they were sealed in ways that made future reopening impossible. The fabric of reality around Khazar Kryn was reinforced with patterns that recognized chaos as a fundamental error, creating barriers that would endure long after the Primarch himself had moved on to other battlefields. Demon armies found themselves cut off from reinforcement and retreat, trapped in real space where Vulkan's purifying flames could reach them without interference from their patron gods. The liberation of Kasser Kryn was accomplished in less than 6 hours, marking the shortest successful campaign against entrenched chaos forces in recorded imperial history. More importantly, it demonstrated that Vulkan's power could create permanent solutions to problems that had plagued humanity for millennia. Warp rifts that had been deemed unclosable were sealed forever. Corrupted worlds were restored to habitability. Demon strongholds became sites of pilgrimage where the faithful could witness miracles that proved hope was more than mere delusion. As news of these victories spread throughout imperial space, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Space Marine chapters that had maintained independence for centuries suddenly petitioned to join Vulkan's crusade, offering their full strength in service to a cause that promised genuine victory rather than endless stalemate. Forge worlds dedicated entire manufacturing capabilities to producing weapons blessed by proximity to the Primarch's artifacts, creating arsenals that could wound the immaterial as effectively as they destroyed physical targets. The Adeptus Mechanicus, long divided between competing interpretations of the Omnissiah's will, found unexpected unity in supporting Vulkan's campaign. Tech priests who had spent lifetimes studying corruption suddenly discovered principles of purification that had been hidden in their most sacred texts for millennia. Forge templates, thought lost during the dark age of technology, emerged from sealed archives as ancient machine spirits responded to the presence of one who understood creation at its deepest levels. On Terra itself, the High Lords of Terra convened in emergency session to address implications that threatened to reshape imperial doctrine from its very foundations. Lord Commander of the Imperium Solar Admiral Lansung presented tactical reports that defied every established principle of warfare, while Grand Provost Marshal Valorian struggled to process intelligence assessments that suggested the eternal war against chaos might actually be winnable. "The strategic implications are staggering," reported Master of the Administratum Goge Vandir during the emergency session. If Primarch Vulkan's capabilities can be sustained across multiple theaters simultaneously, we could achieve in decades what our most optimistic projections suggested would require millennia. Entire subsectors could be permanently liberated from chaos influence. Yet even as hope blazed bright in the hearts of imperial citizens across the galaxy, darker forces were marshalling responses to the threat that Vulkan's return represented. In the Eye of Terror, demon princes, who had not stirred from their domains since the Horus Heresy, began emerging from whatever dark corners they had been hiding in, their corrupted forms enhanced by 10,000 years of exposure to raw warp energy. Abaddon the Despoiler, War Master of Chaos and architect of 13 Black Crusades, emerged from the depths of the Eye of Terror aboard his flagship, Vengeful Spirit. His presence alone was sufficient to rally chaos forces that had been scattered by Vulkan's initial victories, while his strategic genius began crafting countermeasures designed to exploit whatever weaknesses might exist in the Primarch's enhanced capabilities. "Let the Imperium celebrate their Pyrrhic victories," Abaddon declared during a gathering of Chaos Lords that had not convened in such numbers since the Gothic War. Vulkan may have reclaimed scattered worlds and sealed minor rifts, but he is still one being attempting to defend an entire galaxy. We will force him to spread his power across 1,000 theaters, diluting his effectiveness until he becomes vulnerable to decisive assault. The response came in the form of simultaneous offensives launched across 50 different sectors, each one designed to force Vulkan into impossible choices between competing priorities. Yet the returned Primarch had anticipated such tactics, having spent millennia studying the strategic patterns that his enemies employed. His answer was not to spread his forces thinner, but to create focal points of power that could operate independently of his direct presence. Forge temples began rising on worlds throughout imperial space, each one consecrated by artifacts that had been blessed through proximity to Vulkan's presence. These installations served as more than mere weapons manufactories. They were anchor points for the same purifying energies that the Primarch wielded, capable of cleansing corruption across entire systems without requiring his personal intervention. The first of these forged temples was completed on Armageddon, its sacred fires burning with flames that could be seen from orbit even during daylight hours. Within its hallowed halls, weapons were created that carried fragments of the same power that had purified Kasser Kryn and restored the Mordian fortress world. Bolt rounds that could permanently destroy demon flesh, power weapons whose energy fields could cut connections between corrupted souls and their warp patrons, armor that provided protection not merely against physical attack, but against the corrupting influence of chaos itself. As these weapons were distributed to Imperial forces throughout the galaxy, the nature of warfare began to shift in fundamental ways. Guard regiments that had been reduced to skeleton strength by endless chaos raids suddenly found themselves achieving victories that would have been impossible weeks earlier. PDF forces that had been preparing for desperate last stands instead launched offensives against enemies who could no longer rely on resurrection and reinforcement from the Immaterium. The legend of Vulkan's return spread through channels both official and unofficial, carried by astropathic communications and whispered tales from traveling merchants alike. On worlds where Imperial citizens had lived their entire lives under the shadow of chaos corruption, children began to speak of a future where such threats might be permanently eliminated. In underhive settlements, where hope had been forgotten for generations, gang leaders found their authority challenged by populations who suddenly believed that change might actually be possible. Yet for all the victories achieved and hope kindled, Vulkan understood that these were merely the opening moves in a war that would determine the fate of the galaxy itself. The enemy's response would escalate as their losses mounted, forcing him to reveal capabilities that he had not yet chosen to display. The artifacts that enhanced his power were tools of immense capability, but they were also finite resources that required careful management to achieve maximum effect. Standing upon the command deck of the Forgehammer Eternal, as reports of victory continued to arrive from battlefields across the galaxy, the returned Primarch began planning operations that would test the very limits of what enhanced power could achieve. The Burning Crusade had begun, but its success would depend on whether hope could spread faster than despair, and whether the light of purification could outpace the shadows that sought to extinguish it forever. The war for the galaxy's soul had entered a new phase, one where victory was no longer merely possible but probable. Yet probability was not certainty, and the forces of chaos had survived for millennia by adapting to threats that seemed insurmountable. The true test would come when enhanced power met cunning strategy, when the fury of dragons clashed with the patient malice of gods who had learned that time was their greatest weapon. For now, it was enough that hope burned bright in hearts that had forgotten its warmth. The Burning Crusade continued, and with each victory, the dream of a galaxy free from chaos drew closer to reality. The maelstrom hung in space, like a wound that refused to heal, its roiling energies spanning light years of twisted reality, where the laws of physics bent under the weight of raw warp force. For 10,000 years, it had served as a gateway between the material realm and the domain of chaos, spawning demon fleets and corruption that had spread across dozens of sectors like a cancer that consumed hope itself. Now Vulkan came to challenge its very existence. The combined Imperial fleet that accompanied him to the Maelstrom's edge represented the largest concentration of loyal forces assembled since the Great Crusade. Hundreds of vessels bearing the heraldry of every major chapter sailed in perfect formation, their combined firepower sufficient to scour entire systems clean of life. At their head flew the Forge Hammer Eternal, its hull blazing with sacred fires that could be seen across the gulf of space, while deep within its sanctified holds, the 9 artifacts of Vulkan pulsed with harmonized energy that resonated through dimensions beyond mortal perception. "Approach vector established," reported Fleet Admiral Quarren from his position aboard the battleship Indomitable Faith. "All vessels report ready status. Astropathic choirs are maintaining communication despite increasing warp interference. However, Lord Primarch, I must emphasize the unprecedented nature of what we attempt. No force in recorded Imperial history has successfully closed a warp storm of this magnitude." Vulkan studied the tactical displays with the focused intensity of one who understood that this moment would determine whether humanity's war against chaos could truly be won or merely endured. The Maelstrom was more than a natural phenomenon. It was a deliberate construct maintained by the will of all 4 chaos gods working in rare cooperation. To seal it permanently would require power that transcended anything previously achieved, even with the artifact's enhancement. "The enemy expects us to approach as conquerors, seeking to suppress what cannot be contained," he replied, his voice carrying the certainty of one who had spent millennia contemplating this moment. "They do not understand that we come not to destroy but to heal, not to impose order through force, but to restore the natural patterns that existed before their corruption took hold." The plan was audacious beyond measure. Rather than attempting to destroy the Maelstrom through brute force, Vulkan intended to use his artifact's combined power to reach back through time itself, undoing the cosmic catastrophe that had created the storm in the first place. The Song of Entropy would unravel the quantum bonds that sustained the anomaly, while the Engine of Woes would prevent the Chaos Gods from reinforcing their influence. The remaining artifacts would serve as anchor points, creating a matrix of purifying energy that could restore normal space-time across the entire affected region. As the Imperial fleet moved into position around the Maelstrom's perimeter, reality itself began to convulse in response to their presence. The storm's edges, normally chaotic beyond prediction, suddenly stabilized into patterns that suggested vast intelligence directing its energies. Colors that existed only in nightmare blazed across its surface, while sounds that belonged to no mortal throat echoed through the vacuum of space itself. "Contact," reported Sergeant Vorthan, his enhanced senses tracking movement within the storm that defied every principle of physics. Multiple massive signatures emerging from the Maelstrom's core. Configuration unknown, but power readings suggest. "By the throne, Lord Primarch. These readings are off every scale in our tactical manuals." What emerged from the Maelstrom's heart was horror beyond Imperial comprehension. Not fleets or demon engines, but aspects of the Chaos Gods themselves, their infinite malevolence compressed into forms that could exist in real space without immediately tearing apart the fabric of reality. Khorne manifested as a presence of pure martial fury that set every warrior's blood aflame with battle hunger. Nurgle's influence spread like a plague that could corrupt hope itself, while Slanesh's perfection induced madness in those who gazed too long upon beauty that surpassed mortal ability to process. Most terrible of all was Tzinch, the architect of fate, whose presence caused probability itself to become fluid. Tactical displays showed impossible readings, as cause and effect became suggestions rather than laws, while communication arrays reported messages that arrived before they were sent, and battles that were won before they were fought. "Impossible," whispered Techmarine Vorthak, his augmetic systems sparking as they struggled to process data that violated every principle of Imperial technology. The machine spirits are reporting temporal paradoxes across all sensor grids. We are experiencing effects that have not yet occurred while witnessing battles that ended millennia ago. Yet even as cosmic forces arrayed themselves against the Imperial fleet, Vulkan remained focused on his primary objective. The artifacts around him blazed with light that belonged to no spectrum of normal existence, their combined energies reaching across the gulf of space to probe the quantum foundations that sustained the Maelstrom's existence. What he found there confirmed his worst suspicions, while simultaneously revealing opportunities that had not existed during his previous attempts to understand chaos corruption. "The storm is not a natural phenomenon," he announced, his enhanced perception tracing patterns that spanned millennia of accumulated malice. "It is a deliberate construct, an anchor point that allows the Chaos Gods to maintain permanent influence in real space. But its foundation rests upon events that occurred during the war in heaven, wounds in reality that have never properly healed. If we can reach back to that moment, if we can apply healing to the original trauma." The attempt began with the activation of the Song of Entropy, its drake-headed form blazing with energies that could unmake the bonds between dimensions themselves. Vulkan channeled the artifact's power, not forward into the maelstrom, but backward through time, seeking the moment of cosmic trauma that had first weakened reality, enough for chaos influence to take permanent hold. The response from the Chaos Gods was immediate and overwhelming. Reality tore open around the Imperial fleet as demon primarchs manifested in numbers not seen since the darkest days of the Horus heresy. Magnus the Red emerged, wreathed in sorcerous fire that could rewrite the laws of physics through sheer force of will. Angron materialized as pure fury given form, his presence causing even loyalist space marines to struggle against homicidal rage that threatened to overwhelm their enhanced psychoconditioning. Mortarion brought with him plagues that could corrupt matter at the molecular level, while Fulgrim's perfection induced madness in those who witnessed beauty that transcended mortal comprehension. 4 daemon primarchs manifesting simultaneously, reported Captain Lysander, his voice tight with the strain of maintaining tactical coordination while reality convulsed around them. "This is beyond every worst-case scenario in our strategic assessments. How do we engage enemies of this magnitude?" Vulkan's answer came not through words, but through demonstration of capabilities that redefined what was possible even for an enhanced Primarch. As the demon Primarchs closed to engagement range, he activated all 9 artifacts in perfect synchronization, their combined energies creating fields of purification that could wound the immortal and bind the infinite. The battle that followed defied every tactical doctrine ever written. Vulkan stood alone at the center of cosmic forces that sought to unmake his very existence, wielding artifacts that allowed him to fight beings whose power approached that of gods themselves. The spear of Vulkan blazed with fire that could burn through the barriers between dimensions, while Kessere's mantle provided protection against attacks that operated on principles beyond imperial understanding. For hours that felt like eternities, the returned Primarch held his ground against 4 of his fallen brothers simultaneously. Magnus hurled sorcery that could rewrite fundamental constants, only to watch his spells dissipate against barriers of absolute order. Angren's rage-fueled assaults met immovable defenses that channeled his fury harmlessly into the void. Mortarian's plagues found no purchase on armor that purified corruption faster than it could spread, while Fulgrim's perfect strikes were turned aside by weapons that recognized perfection as another form of corruption. Yet even enhanced by artifacts of immeasurable power, Vulkan could not maintain such a defense indefinitely. The demon primarchs were aspects of infinite malevolence, sustained by the collective hatred and despair of countless mortals across the galaxy. Each time they were wounded, fresh corruption flowed from the maelstrom to restore their strength, while Vulkan's power, however enhanced, remained ultimately finite. The artifact matrix is reaching critical stress levels, reported Techmarine Kellen, his augmetic systems monitoring power flows that threatened to overload even crystalline containment units designed to hold the energy of dying stars. Lord Primarch, we cannot maintain this level of output indefinitely. The enemy's resources appear to be functionally limitless, while ours are sufficient for what we have accomplished, Vulkan finished, his enhanced perception already recognizing the strategic realities that dictated immediate withdrawal. The maelstrom had been wounded, its edges sealed, and its connection to the deepest reaches of the warp severed in dozens of critical locations. Though not completely closed, the storm's ability to spawn demon fleets had been permanently crippled, its influence reduced to a fraction of its previous scope. More importantly, the battle had revealed truths that would reshape his understanding of the war against chaos. The four gods had been forced to cooperate and commit resources on a scale that left them temporarily vulnerable elsewhere. Their demon primarchs, manifested simultaneously in real space, could not easily return to the immaterium without significant cost. The unified front they had presented was a sign of desperation rather than strength, proof that Vulkan's enhanced capabilities represented a genuine threat to their eternal dominion. "All vessels, prepare for immediate withdrawal," he commanded, the artifact's energies already beginning the complex process of disengaging from quantum structures that spanned multiple dimensions. "We have accomplished what we came to achieve. The maelstrom bleeds, and that wound will not heal quickly." The strategic retreat proceeded under the cover of Imperial naval firepower that held the demon primarchs at bay, while Vulkan's fleet disengaged from the cosmic battlefield. As warp drives activated and reality folded around departing vessels, the returned Primarch stood in the observation deck of the Forge Hammer Eternal and studied readings that confirmed both victory and limitation. The maelstrom still existed, its core intact despite the wounds inflicted upon its periphery. Yet its power had been reduced by nearly 40%, its ability to spawn corruption permanently limited by the damage done to its quantum foundations. Across the affected sectors, worlds that had lived under the storm's shadow for millennia suddenly found their skies clear for the first time in recorded memory. "Partial victory," observed Chaplain Elysius as he reviewed battle reports that would require new categories of classification. Yet perhaps that was always the realistic goal. To close such a phenomenon completely might require allies of equal power, Vulkan finished, his tactical mind already processing implications that would reshape his approach to the larger war. One Primarch, however enhanced, cannot face the unified opposition of all four Chaos gods indefinitely, but two Primarchs, or three, or more. The revelation was both sobering and encouraging. Vulkan's enhanced capabilities had proven sufficient to wound cosmic forces that had seemed invulnerable. But ultimate victory would require cooperation on a scale that had not existed since the Great Crusade itself. The quest for additional artifacts was complete, but the quest for additional allies had only just begun. As astropathic messages began arriving from across the galaxy, Reports of the Maelstrom battle spread through both Imperial and Chaos command structures with the speed of wildfire. On Loyalist worlds, populations who had lived their entire lives under threat of demon invasion suddenly found reason to believe that such threats might actually be eliminated. In the Eye of Terror, Chaos Lords who had considered themselves untouchable began taking defensive precautions for the first time in millennia. The balance of cosmic forces had shifted, though not as decisively as Vulkan had hoped. The war against Chaos remained winnable, but victory would require resources and allies that he did not yet possess. The search for his missing brothers would have to begin immediately, for the enemy's response to this demonstration of power would be swift and merciless. Standing in the sanctified chambers of his flagship as it carried them toward the next phase of an increasingly complex campaign, Vulkan began planning operations that would test the very limits of what enhanced Primarch power could achieve. The Maelstrom had been wounded, but not slain, its partial sealing serving as both victory and warning. The gods of Chaos had revealed their hand, demonstrating capabilities that matched even his enhanced power when they worked in perfect coordination. Yet they had also revealed their limitations, showing that unified opposition was possible only under the most extreme circumstances. The key to ultimate victory lay not in matching their power directly, but in forcing them to divide their attention across multiple threats that they could not simultaneously address. The hunt for additional Primarchs would begin immediately, for the war's next phase would require allies whose power approached his own. The galaxy held secrets that even the Chaos gods did not fully understand, and some of those secrets might yet prove decisive in determining whether hope or despair would shape the future of all creation. The Maelstrom cleansing was complete, its partial success serving as both triumph and prologue to battles that would dwarf even this cosmic confrontation. The returned Lord of Drakes had proven that the gods themselves could be wounded, but he had also learned that they would not yield their dominion without resistance that tested the very foundations of reality itself. The journey to Terra took 7 weeks through warp routes that had remained stable since the dark days of the Horus heresy. Yet Vulkan felt the weight of every parsec that separated him from the cradle of humanity. The Forge Hammer Eternal sailed alone this time, its sacred hull blessed with prayers that had been spoken continuously since departing Nocturne, while deep within its most protected chambers, the 9 artifacts hummed with harmonies that seemed to anticipate their return to the world where they had first been conceived. The Sol system received them with honors that had not been accorded to any since the Great Crusade itself. Fleets of the Imperial Navy formed honor guards that stretched from the edge of the system to Terra's orbital defenses, their guns silent, but their crews standing at perfect attention as the returned Primarch's vessel passed between their ranks. On Luna, the ancient fortress monasteries of the Grey Knights blazed with psychic wards that had been reinforced for the occasion, while Mars itself pulsed with machine hymns that spoke of the Omnissiah's approval for this unprecedented pilgrimage. Terra hung before them like a jewel carved from stone and steel, its surface transformed by 10,000 years of continuous habitation into a world that existed solely to serve as the beating heart of the Imperium. Hive spires reached toward the heavens like metal mountains, while transportation networks carved patterns of light across continents that had been reshaped by the will of countless generations. Yet beneath the glory lay scars that would never heal. The ruins of the Imperial Palace's outer walls, still bearing the marks of weapons that had been fired by brother against brother during humanity's darkest hour. As the Forge Hammer Eternal descended toward the landing platforms reserved for the most sacred visitors, Vulkan stood in his private chambers and felt the weight of destiny settling upon his shoulders like a mantle woven from starlight itself. The artifacts around him pulsed with increasing intensity as they drew closer to their place of origin, their combined energies creating harmonics that penetrated through multiple dimensions to touch forces that dwelt beyond mortal comprehension. The custodian guard met them at the platform's edge, their golden armor gleaming with oils that had been blessed in ceremonies dating back to the Unification Wars. Captain General Valoris himself led the honor guard, his presence marking this as an occasion of significance beyond normal protocol. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute authority, tempered by genuine reverence. "Lord Vulkan, Primarch of the 18th Legion, welcome home. His Divine Majesty awaits your presence in the Sanctum Imperialis. Be aware that the journey ahead will test even your enhanced capabilities. The psychic barriers protecting the Golden Throne have been strengthened 100-fold since your last visit, and the Emperor's current state requires accommodation for those who would commune with his divine consciousness." The descent into the palace's deepest levels took hours as layer after layer of security protocols were observed and honored. Each checkpoint represented centuries of accumulated paranoia and protection, while every corridor they traversed had been blessed by saints whose names were known to none save the most senior members of the Adeptus Ministorum. Here walked the ghosts of heroes whose sacrifice had preserved humanity through its darkest epochs, while the very walls seemed to pulse with the accumulated faith of billions who had looked to Terra as the source of their hope. The throne room itself defied every attempt at description, its vast space encompassing architectural achievements that bridged technology and divinity in ways that hurt the mind to contemplate. At its heart sat the Golden Throne, that miraculous fusion of Dark Age technology and psychic amplification that had sustained the Emperor's consciousness for 10 millennia, while his physical form endured torments that would have destroyed lesser beings in moments. Upon that throne sat a figure that had once been the greatest of men and had become something far more terrible and wonderful. The Emperor's physical form bore the marks of his eternal sacrifice, flesh that existed in a state between life and death, sustained by technologies that operated on principles beyond imperial understanding. Yet his psychic presence filled the chamber with power that could be felt across the breadth of the galaxy, a beacon of hope that had guided humanity through its longest night. "My son." The Emperor's voice came not through the air, but directly into Vulkan's consciousness, warm as the forge fires of creation, and vast as the space between stars. "You have returned to us, bearing gifts that were intended for this moment, since the day they were first conceived. Approach, and let us share the burden of knowledge that has weighed upon our thoughts for 10,000 years. Vulkan walked forward across marble floors that had been consecrated with the blood of martyrs and the tears of saints, each step bringing him closer to a presence whose magnitude threatened to overwhelm even his enhanced psyche. The artifacts he carried blazed with inner light that seemed to respond to proximity to their ultimate source, while the very air around him shimmered with energies that belonged to realms beyond normal perception. As he knelt before the Golden Throne, the chamber filled with light that belonged to no spectrum of normal existence. Through that radiance, the Emperor's true form became visible, not the broken figure chained to ancient machinery, but the being of pure will and accumulated wisdom that had guided humanity since its first stumbling steps toward the stars. When he spoke again, his words carried the weight of cosmic understanding. "The artifacts you have gathered are more than mere weapons against the servants of chaos," the Emperor explained, his consciousness reaching out to encompass patterns of reality that spanned multiple dimensions. They are anchor points, keys to a great working that has been 10 millennia in the preparation. Your perpetual nature, my son, makes you the perfect vessel for energies that would destroy any lesser being, while your understanding of creation itself allows you to channel forces that operate beyond the boundaries of normal space-time. The vision that followed struck Vulkan with the force of stellar birth, showing him possibilities that had remained hidden since the war in heaven itself. He saw the galaxy as it had been before the Chaos God's corruption took hold, when the warp flowed clear and pure as mountain streams, carrying dreams rather than nightmares across the vast gulfs between stars. He witnessed the moment of cosmic trauma that had first allowed malevolent forces to gain permanent purchase in reality, creating wounds that had festered for 65 million years. The Chaos Gods are not native to this reality, the Emperor continued, his words reshaping Vulkan's understanding of existence itself. They are invasive entities, parasites that feed upon emotion and sustain themselves through the suffering they cause. Yet parasites require hosts, and hosts can be healed if the proper medicine is applied with sufficient precision and power. The scope of the Emperor's plan unfolded like a flower of pure knowledge blooming in Vulkan's enhanced consciousness. The artifacts he had gathered were designed to work in conjunction with other Primarchs, each one serving as a focal point for energies that could reach back to the moment of original corruption and apply healing that would cascade forward through all subsequent history. The perpetual nature that Vulkan alone possessed among his brothers would allow him to anchor the working, preventing the temporal paradoxes that would otherwise tear reality apart. Yet the task is too great for any one Primarch to accomplish alone, the Emperor admitted, his acknowledgement carrying the weight of cosmic humility. Your brothers who yet live must be found and awakened, their own unique capabilities brought to bear upon wounds that have scarred the galaxy for longer than most species have existed. Some sleep in hidden chambers, others walk paths that have taken them beyond the boundaries of normal space. All must be gathered if the great working is to succeed. The revelation that other Primarchs could be found and restored sent waves of hope and determination through Vulkan's enhanced psyche. Images flashed through his consciousness. Lionel Johnson, sleeping in the deepest chambers of the rock, his wounds healing through mechanisms that operated below conscious awareness. Russ wandering the Eye of Terror itself, following paths known only to the Emperor and seeking truths that could only be found in the heart of corruption. Korax walking between dimensions, his mastery of shadow allowing him to exist outside normal reality while maintaining his essential humanity. The power to locate and awaken them lies within the artifacts you have gathered, the Emperor explained, his consciousness reaching out to encompass the 9 relics that pulsed with harmonized energy. Yet finding them is only the beginning. Each brother will bring his own understanding, his own capabilities, his own interpretation of what victory must entail. Unity of purpose will be required on a scale that has not existed since the Great Crusade itself. As the vision of possibility faded, Vulkan found himself kneeling before the Golden Throne with tears streaming down his cheeks and understanding blazing in his enhanced mind. The war against chaos was not merely winnable, it was destined to be won, provided that he could overcome the challenges of locating and awakening Primarchs who had been lost for millennia. The artifacts in his possession were keys to locks that had been waiting 10,000 years to be opened. We grant you additional power, my son, the Emperor declared, his consciousness reaching out to establish connections that linked Vulkan more directly to the Golden Throne itself. Draw upon our strength when the need becomes dire. Channel our will when your own proves insufficient. Yet remember that power shared is also responsibility shared. You carry not merely our hopes, but the dreams of every human soul that has ever looked to the stars and dared to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. The sensation of divine power flowing into his enhanced physiology was beyond description. Vulkan felt his connection to the artifacts deepen, while new capabilities awakened within his consciousness. The ability to perceive his brothers across vast gulfs of space and time, to reach through dimensions that existed beyond normal perception, to touch the dreams of those who had been lost and kindle within them the fire of remembrance. Rising from his position before the throne, Vulkan stood transformed yet again. The power that flowed through him now was not merely his own, but a fraction of the Emperor's infinite will, channeled through artifacts that had been designed for this specific purpose, and focused through a perpetual nature that could contain energies sufficient to reshape reality itself. "The quest for my brothers begins immediately," he declared, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated through multiple dimensions. "Each day that passes allows chaos to strengthen their defenses and marshal new corruptions. Yet with each brother we awaken, our own capabilities will multiply exponentially. The endgame approaches, and victory lies within our grasp." The journey back to the Forgehammer Eternal proceeded through corridors that seemed to pulse with renewed purpose. Custodian guards who had maintained their vigil for millennia found themselves standing straighter as the enhanced Primarch passed, while servo skulls throughout the palace registered energy readings that surpassed their ability to classify or understand. As terror fell away beneath them, and the familiar darkness of space welcomed their return to active campaign, Vulkan stood in his private chambers and felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling upon his shoulders like a mantle woven from destiny itself. The artifacts around him hummed with new purpose, while his enhanced senses reached out across the galaxy, seeking traces of Primarch essence that had been hidden for millennia. Somewhere in the darkness, his brothers waited. Some slept in chambers that had been sealed since the heresy's end. Others walked paths that existed beyond normal reality, while still others pursued quests whose purpose remained known only to themselves and their father. All would be found, all would be awakened, all would be brought to bear upon wounds that had festered since the dawn of galactic civilization. The first target was already clear in his enhanced perception, a signal that blazed across the darkness like a beacon of pure stubbornness and uncompromising duty. Lionel Johnson slept in chambers beneath the rock, his wounds healing through mechanisms that had operated for 10,000 years without conscious direction. The Dark Angel's Primarch would be the first to return, his strategic genius and absolute loyalty providing the foundation upon which all subsequent victories would be built. Yet even as hope blazed bright in his enhanced consciousness, Vulkan understood that the enemy would not remain passive while their plans reached fruition. The demonstration at the Maelstrom had revealed the true scope of what they attempted, forcing the Chaos Gods to recognize that their eternal dominion faced a genuine threat. The response would be swift and merciless, designed to prevent the awakening of additional Primarchs through any means necessary. The final phase of the war against chaos was about to begin, with stakes that encompassed not merely the fate of humanity, but the fundamental nature of reality itself. Victory would require cooperation on a scale that had not existed since the Great Crusade, while defeat would mean the permanent triumph of forces that sought nothing less than the corruption of all existence. Standing in the observation deck of his flagship, as it accelerated toward the Caliban system, Vulkan began planning operations that would test every capability he possessed, while drawing upon powers that bridged the gap between mortal and divine. The Emperor's vision had shown him the path to ultimate victory, but walking that path would require courage, wisdom, and sacrifice on a scale that would echo through eternity. The hunt for the lion was about to begin, marking the first step in a quest that would either restore the galaxy to glory beyond imagining or witness its final descent into eternal darkness. Yet for the first time since his resurrection, Vulkan felt absolutely certain that victory was not merely possible but inevitable, provided that he could overcome the challenges that awaited in the darkness between the stars. The rock hung in the void like a fortress, carved from darkness itself, its ancient stone bearing scars that told the tale of Caliban's destruction and the Dark Angel's eternal shame. For 10,000 years it had served as both monastery and prison, sheltering secrets that the chapter's leadership guarded with fanatical devotion while pursuing a redemption that seemed forever beyond their grasp. Now Vulkan came to that ancient stronghold, bearing power that could pierce veils that had remained intact since the Horus heresy itself. The Dark Angel's fleet that met them at the system's edge moved with the precise coordination that marked their legion as among the Emperor's most disciplined sons. Dozens of vessels bearing the winged sword icon took defensive positions around the rock, while astropathic communications crackled with messages that carried barely concealed suspicion. Supreme Grand Master Azrael himself appeared on the main viewing screen, his features bearing the weight of secrets that had been passed down through generations of chapter leadership. Lord Vulkan, Azrael spoke with the careful formality that his chapter employed when addressing those whose loyalty was unquestioned, but whose purposes remained unclear. The Dark Angels welcome you to the Caliban system, though we must ask the nature of your visit. The rock houses many sacred artifacts and chambers whose security cannot be compromised, even for one of your exalted station. Vulkan studied the Supreme Grand Master with enhanced perception that allowed him to read patterns of stress and concealment that would have remained hidden from lesser observers. The Dark Angels guarded their secret with desperate intensity, unaware that the object of their protection was precisely what he had come to claim. When he spoke, his words carried the authority of one who understood truths that had been hidden for millennia. I come not as conqueror, but as brother, seeking one who has slept too long in chambers that were meant for healing rather than eternal imprisonment. Your gene-sire Lion Eljonson lives, Supreme Grand Master, and the time has come for his awakening. The silence that followed stretched taut as a bowstring, while Azrael's features shifted through expressions that ranged from shock to desperate hope to carefully controlled skepticism. The revelation that their Primarch lived was the most closely guarded secret in Dark Angel's history, known only to the inner circle and protected by oaths that bound souls more completely than chains of adamantium. That Vulkan possessed this knowledge suggested capabilities that transcended even Primarch-level awareness. You speak of impossibilities, Azrael replied, though his voice carried undertones that suggested otherwise. The lion fell during the battle with Luther, his fate unknown to all save the Emperor himself. If such knowledge were true, if our gene-sire truly lived, then his sons would have spent 10 millennia in fruitless pursuit of redemption for sins that were never truly theirs to bear, Vulkan finished gently. The fallen are corruption's victims rather than willing servants, and their hunt has prevented the Dark Angels from achieving the unity of purpose that their Primarch will require upon awakening. I have come to heal wounds that have festered since the heresy's end. The debate that followed consumed hours as the inner circle convened in emergency session to address revelations that threatened to reshape their understanding of their chapter's fundamental purpose. While the Dark Angels' leadership struggled with implications that transcended their carefully maintained doctrines, Vulkan stood in the observation deck of the Forge Hammer Eternal and felt his enhanced senses reaching through layers of stone and adamantium to touch consciousness that slumbered in the rock's deepest chambers. The lion's presence blazed across his perception like a beacon of pure stubbornness and uncompromising duty, unchanged by millennia of healing sleep. Where other Primarchs might have been diminished by their ordeals, Lionel Jonsson had used the time to process traumas that would have broken lesser beings, emerging stronger rather than scarred by proximity to forces that sought to corrupt the very concept of loyalty itself. "Permission to approach granted," came Azrael's voice after consultation that had clearly tested every principle the Dark Angels held sacred. "Yet know this, Lord Vulkan. If your claims prove false, if this represents some form of deception or corruption, the Dark Angels will respond with force that recognizes no bond of brotherhood or shared gene heritage. We have guarded our most sacred trust for 10,000 years, and will not see it compromised by false hope or enemy manipulation." The descent into the rock's deepest levels proceeded through passages that had been carved during the dark age of technology, their walls inscribed with protective wards that had been maintained by countless generations of techmarines and chaplains. Each level they passed through represented another layer of secrecy, another barrier designed to prevent unauthorized access to chambers whose very existence was denied by official chapter records. The final chamber lay beyond defenses that combined technology with psychic wards, protected by systems that would have challenged even demon princes seeking to penetrate the Dark Angel's most sacred sanctuary. Yet Vulkan's artifacts resonated with harmonics that recognized no barrier save those erected with genuine righteousness, their combined energies creating passages through adamantium and blessed steel, as though such obstacles were mere suggestions rather than absolute barriers. At the chamber's heart, suspended in a stasis field that hummed with power drawn from the rock's deepest reactors, lay Lionel Jonsson. The First Legion's Primarch appeared exactly as he had 10,000 years earlier, tall and proud, his features bearing the noble bearing that had marked him as one of the Emperor's most trusted sons. His armor, the same suit he had worn during his final battle with Luther, showed signs of damage that spoke to the violence of that long-ago confrontation, while his weapons rested within easy reach, as though he had merely paused rather than fallen into healing sleep. "By the throne," whispered Chaplain Asmodai, his voice breaking with emotions that transcended his enhanced conditioning. "He truly lives. Our gene sire endures, waiting for the moment of awakening that we had begun to believe would never come." Vulkan approached the stasis field with reverence that acknowledged both the magnitude of what he attempted and the trust that the Dark Angels had placed in his capabilities. The artifacts around him blazed with inner light that seemed to respond to proximity to another Primarch, their combined energies creating patterns that bridged the gap between technology and miracle. When he spoke, his words carried power that reached across dimensions to touch consciousness that had slumbered for millennia. "Brother," he called, his voice resonating through harmonics that existed beyond normal perception. "The galaxy has need of your strength, and your sons have proven themselves worthy inheritors of your legacy. The time of healing is complete. The time of awakening has come." The moment the stasis field collapsed, the chamber filled with presence that had been absent from the galaxy for 10,000 years. Lionel Jonsson drew his first conscious breath in millennia, his enhanced physiology immediately adapting to conditions that had changed beyond recognition during his long sleep. When his eyes opened, they blazed with intelligence and determination that had been tempered rather than diminished by proximity to forces that sought to corrupt the very concept of duty itself. Vulkan! The lion's voice carried the authority of one who had helped build the Imperium from its very foundations, while his posture shifted from repose to readiness with fluid grace that spoke to reflexes undiminished by extended dormancy. I felt your approaching presence across the void, your enhanced power calling to consciousness that had grown weary of dreams. How long have I slept, brother? What has become of the Imperium we swore to protect? The reunion that followed was witnessed by dozens of dark angels who had never dared hope to see their gene sire in living flesh, their enhanced physiology struggling to process emotions that transcended every parameter of their conditioning. As Vulkan helped his brother to his feet, the chamber filled with light that belonged to no spectrum of normal existence, while both Primarchs felt power flowing between them that multiplied rather than merely adding to their individual capabilities. 10,000 years have passed since Luther's betrayal, Vulkan replied, his enhanced perception already cataloguing the changes that healing sleep had worked upon his brother's consciousness. The galaxy bleeds from wounds that have festered since the heresy's end, while forces that seek humanity's destruction have grown bold in our absence. Yet hope endures, and with your awakening, victory becomes not merely possible but inevitable. The briefing that followed encompassed millennia of accumulated tragedy and triumph as Vulkan shared knowledge that reshaped the Lion's understanding of what their father's Imperium had become. The Emperor's confinement to the Golden Throne, the rise of the Ecclesiarchy, the endless wars against chaos forces that seemed to regenerate faster than they could be destroyed. Each revelation carried weight that would have crushed lesser beings while serving only to strengthen the Lion's resolve. The fallen still plague my sons, the Lion observed, his tactical mind immediately grasping the strategic implications of what he had learned. Their corruption spreads like poison through ranks that should stand united against humanity's enemies. This division must be healed before we can achieve the cooperation necessary to implement Father's plan. Vulkan's response demonstrated capabilities that had been enhanced by his communion with the Emperor's divine consciousness. Rather than attempting to explain complex theological principles, he reached out with power that could touch the very essence of corruption itself, tracing connections that led from the rock's chambers to distant worlds where the fallen pursued their own desperate campaigns against forces that sought their eternal damnation. They are not lost, he declared with certainty that transcended mere hope. The fallen fight corruption through methods that their training never prepared them to employ, seeking redemption through paths that the dark angel's doctrine has taught you to reject. Yet paths that lead toward light remain valid regardless of the darkness through which they pass. They can be healed, brother, and through their healing, your legion can be restored to full strength. The campaign that followed redefined what was possible when enhanced Primarch power was applied with perfect coordination and absolute trust. Where the Lion's strategic genius identified targets that would yield maximum impact, Vulkan's artifacts provided capabilities that could achieve objectives previously deemed impossible. Their combined fleet moved through chaos-held systems like a cleansing fire, leaving behind worlds that had been not merely liberated, but permanently purified of corruption. The first system they cleansed had been held by word-bearers for 3 millennia. Its population transformed into cultists who worshipped demon princes as living gods. Traditional imperial doctrine would have required exterminatus to prevent corruption from spreading. Yet the combined power of two Primarchs achieved solutions that preserved rather than destroyed. Vulkan's purifying flames drove out demonic influence, while the Lion's tactical brilliance coordinated simultaneous strikes against corruption nodes, creating cascading effects that cleansed entire continents within hours rather than decades. The second system presented challenges that tested even their enhanced capabilities. Iron warriors had transformed it into a fortress complex that spanned multiple worlds, their defensive networks protected by technologies that blended imperial engineering with demonic enhancement. Yet where traditional assaults would have ground to bloody stalemates, the combined Primarch assault achieved breakthrough that defied every principle of siege warfare. The Lion's knowledge of fortification weaknesses, combined with Vulkan's ability to permanently destroy the demon engines that powered defensive systems, creating opportunities that existed only when such capabilities worked in perfect harmony. The third system required different approaches, as Thousand Suns sorcerers had woven reality itself into defensive barriers that operated on principles beyond imperial understanding. Temporal loops caused attacking forces to experience the same battle repeatedly, while spatial distortions made it impossible to maintain coherent formations across engagement ranges. Yet the artifact's power proved sufficient to anchor reality in patterns that recognized sorcery as corruption rather than legitimate force, allowing conventional tactics to succeed where they would otherwise have proven completely ineffective. "Remarkable," the Lion observed, as they stood in the ruins of what had once been the largest demon-summoning circle in the sector. "Our individual capabilities are enhanced exponentially by coordination that recognizes our unique strengths while compensating for respective limitations. If this pattern holds true for other awakened brothers, then Father's plan becomes not merely achievable but unstoppable," Vulkan finished, his enhanced perception already reaching out across the galaxy to seek traces of other Primarch essence that might yield to similar approaches. "Each brother we awaken will multiply our capabilities while reducing the enemy's ability to mount effective resistance. The mathematics of victory become increasingly favorable with each success." As reports of their victories spread across the galaxy, the response from both Imperial and Chaos forces was immediate and dramatic. On Loyalist worlds, populations who had despaired of ever seeing permanent victory suddenly found reason to believe that their long nightmare might actually end. In the Eye of Terror, Chaos Lords who had considered themselves untouchable began taking defensive precautions for the first time in millennia. Yet, it was among the Dark Angels themselves that the most profound changes occurred. The knowledge that their Primarch lived and fought alongside his brother created unity of purpose that had not existed since the heresy itself. Companies that had operated independently for centuries suddenly coordinated with precision that approached their founding legion's original capabilities, while recruitment from their homeworld increased as the population responded to hope that transcended mere propaganda. "The fallen can be redeemed," the Lion declared during a gathering of the Inner Circle that would reshape Dark Angel's doctrine for millennia to come. "Our brother Vulkan has shown me truths that my long sleep allowed me to process without the burden of accumulated guilt and shame. The hunt that has defined us for 10,000 years must end, replaced by healing that recognizes corruption as disease rather than sin." The search for other missing Primarchs began immediately as both brothers coordinated their enhanced senses to trace patterns that spanned galactic distances. Somewhere in the darkness, their brothers waited. Some sleeping in chambers that had been sealed since the heresy's end, others walking paths that existed beyond normal reality, while still others pursued quests whose purpose remained known only to themselves and their father. Standing on the command deck of the Forgehammer Eternal, as their combined fleet prepared for the next phase of what was rapidly becoming the most ambitious campaign since the Great Crusade, Vulkan felt satisfaction that transcended mere victory. The Lion's awakening had proven that the Emperor's plan could succeed, that Primarchs long thought lost could be restored to fight beside their living brothers in the final war against chaos. Two Primarchs now stood where one had fought alone, their combined power creating possibilities that neither could have achieved through individual effort. Yet this was only the beginning. Somewhere in the darkness, other brothers waited for awakening, each one representing exponential increases in capability that would eventually overwhelm even the unified opposition of all four Chaos gods. The tide of war was turning, slowly but inexorably, as hope kindled fires that had been thought extinguished forever. The galaxy's longest night was finally drawing toward dawn, and when that dawn broke fully, it would illuminate a future where humanity's enemies would find no refuge from the light of purification. Yet challenges remained that would test even their combined capabilities. The enemy's response to two awakened Primarchs would be swift and merciless, while the search for additional brothers would take them into regions where reality itself operated on principles that defied imperial understanding. The war for the galaxy's soul continued, but now it was a war that could genuinely be won, rather than merely endured. Standing beside his awakened brother, as reports of their victories continued to arrive from battlefields across the sector, Vulkan began planning operations that would either bring additional Primarchs into their growing alliance or reveal the limits of what enhanced power could achieve against enemies who had survived by learning to adapt to threats that seemed insurmountable. The hunt for their missing brothers had begun in earnest, and with each success, the dream of a galaxy free from chaos drew closer to reality. The world of Hadrian's hope had been born from nightmare and transformed into something that defied every principle of imperial doctrine regarding corrupted territories. 3 months earlier, it had been a demon world where reality itself bent under the weight of chaos corruption, its surface scarred by cities built from screaming flesh and seas that burned with emotions given substance. Now it stood as testament to what could be achieved when Primarch power was applied with purpose that transcended mere conquest. Vulkan walked through streets that had been paved with purified stone, their surfaces inscribed with symbols that provided permanent protection against the influence of the warp. Around him, children played games that their parents had never dared imagine possible, while merchants traded goods that bore no taint of corruption. The transformation was complete, not merely in physical terms, but in spiritual ones. This world had been healed at levels that touched the very essence of existence itself. Beside him walked Lion L. Johnson, his presence serving as anchor point for strategic wisdom that complemented his brother's understanding of creation and purification. Together, they had achieved, in months, what imperial doctrine suggested would require centuries, permanently cleansing 17 systems while establishing defensive networks that could prevent corruption from ever taking root again. The mathematics of victory become increasingly favorable, the Lion observed, as they approached the planetary governor's palace, its architecture blending imperial efficiency with designs that promoted harmony rather than mere functionality. Each world we cleanse provides resources for additional operations, while each success demonstrates to enemy forces that permanent defeat is not merely possible, but inevitable. The psychological impact alone may prove decisive in sectors where conventional warfare has reached stalemate. Vulkan nodded agreement as his enhanced senses catalogued the changes that their presence had worked upon this world's fundamental nature. The warp signatures that had once screamed across every spectrum of psychic perception now hummed with harmonies that promoted growth rather than decay. Children born here would grow up knowing that chaos was a defeated enemy rather than an eternal threat, their faith serving as additional protection against influences that sought to corrupt hope itself. The doctrine they had established during their joint campaigns was already spreading throughout Imperial space, carried by Space Marine chapters that had witnessed capabilities which redefined what was possible in the eternal war against chaos. Rather than endless cycles of defensive warfare punctuated by Pyrrhic victories, Loyalist forces now pursued strategies that sought permanent solutions to problems that had plagued humanity for millennia. The Eternal Flame. Vulkan spoke the name that had emerged naturally from their tactical discussions, describing the network of sanctified worlds that would serve as anchor points for purifying energy across entire sectors. Each world we cleanse becomes a beacon that can project protection across light years of space, creating safe zones where corruption cannot gain purchase regardless of enemy efforts. Within a century, we could establish sufficient coverage to render large portions of the galaxy permanently immune to chaos influence. The implications of such a network staggered even Primarch-level strategic thinking. Worlds that had lived under constant threat of demon invasion could focus resources on growth rather than mere survival. Trade routes that had been abandoned due to warp storm interference could be reopened under protection that operated on principles immune to chaos disruption. The Imperium could begin expanding again rather than merely holding defensive lines against entropy that seemed inevitable. Training programs had already begun on Nocturne and the Rock, teaching techniques that allowed ordinary Space Marines to wield weapons blessed by proximity to Primarch power, while such warriors could not approach the capabilities that Vulkan and the Lion demonstrated when working in combination. They could achieve permanent victory over enemies that had previously required constant vigilance to contain. Knowledge that had been thought lost during the dark age of technology was being rediscovered through understanding of principles that bridged science and faith. Other chapters request deployment of training cadres, reported Captain Lysander during their morning briefing, his Imperial fists having proven among the most adaptable to techniques that emphasized purification over pure destruction. Ultramarines, Blood Angels, Iron Hands, all have submitted formal requests for instruction in anti-chaos methodologies. Chapter Master Calgar himself has requested personal consultation regarding large-scale purification operations. The response from Loyalist forces across the galaxy had exceeded every optimistic projection. Word of permanent victories had spread through astropathic networks and personal testimony alike, creating demand for knowledge that could achieve similar results in theaters where conventional warfare had ground to bloody stalemate. Yet Vulkan understood that true success would require more than tactical adaptation. It would demand fundamental changes in how Imperial forces understood their relationship to the enemies they faced. Chaos is not an inevitable force of nature, he had explained during the first interchapter training conference. His words carried simultaneously to dozens of fortress monasteries through astropathic relay. It is a disease that has infected reality itself, a corruption that feeds upon despair and sustains itself through the suffering it causes. Yet diseases can be cured when the proper medicine is applied with sufficient understanding and will. We do not seek to contain corruption, but to heal the wounds that allow it to exist. The philosophical implications of such understanding reached far beyond military doctrine. For 10,000 years, Imperial citizens had lived with the knowledge that chaos was an eternal enemy that could be fought but never truly defeated. Now, for the first time since the Great Crusade, populations across the galaxy dared to believe that their children might inherit a universe where such threats had been permanently eliminated. Standing in the governor's audience chamber, where he would address representatives from across the sector, Vulkan felt the weight of responsibility that came with offering hope to those who had forgotten what it meant to truly believe in tomorrow. The words he spoke here would be transmitted across the galaxy, carried by astropaths and missionaries alike to worlds where imperial citizens struggled against despair that seemed justified by 10 millennia of endless warfare. "Citizens of the Imperium," he began, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated through multiple dimensions to touch souls that had been scarred by proximity to forces that sought their corruption. "I stand before you, not as conqueror but as guardian, not as distant authority, but as protector whose duty is measured by your safety rather than your submission. The galaxy has been wounded, but wounds can heal when tended by hands that understand both the nature of injury and the principles of restoration." The audience that filled the chamber represented every stratum of imperial society, planetary governors whose worlds had been liberated from chaos rule, guard commanders whose regiments had achieved victories previously deemed impossible, civilians whose families had been restored to worlds thought permanently lost. Each face bore expressions that ranged from desperate hope to carefully controlled skepticism, marking those who had learned not to trust promises that seemed too good to be true. For 10,000 years, humanity has endured under the shadow of threats that seemed eternal and enemies that appeared immortal, Vulkan continued, his enhanced perception reading emotional patterns that revealed the depth of trauma that chaos corruption had inflicted upon the collective human psyche. Yet eternity is a concept that belongs to gods, and these enemies have proven themselves to be merely parasites that can be severed from their hosts when the proper tools are applied with sufficient skill and determination. He gestured toward displays that showed tactical charts covering the 17 systems they had cleansed, each one marked with symbols that indicated not merely liberation, but permanent protection against future corruption. The mathematics were undeniable. Each success created resources for additional operations, while denying assets to enemies whose power depended upon the despair and corruption they could harvest from imperial worlds. The eternal flame burns now across these systems, maintained by technologies that blend the Emperor's wisdom with understanding, gained through 10,000 years of struggle against forces that seek our destruction. Yet this flame requires tending by those who understand that freedom is not a gift to be received, but a responsibility to be maintained through constant vigilance and unwavering dedication to principles that elevate rather than corrupt. The training programs he described would extend far beyond Space Marine chapters to encompass every branch of Imperial service. PDF forces would learn techniques for identifying corruption in its earliest stages, while planetary defense monitors would be equipped with weapons capable of permanently disrupting demon manifestations. Astropaths would receive instruction in psychic disciplines that could prevent chaos influence from spreading through communication networks, while tech priests would study principles that allowed machinery to recognize corruption as error rather than legitimate command input. "This war will not end in our lifetimes," Vulkan acknowledged, his words carrying the weight of Primarch-level strategic understanding that encompassed galactic timescales beyond mortal comprehension. "Victory against chaos requires not single decisive battles, but the patient accumulation of permanent gains that deny our enemies the resources they require for sustained campaign. Each world we cleanse, each citizen we protect, Each child who grows to adulthood, free from corruption's influence, represents progress toward ultimate victory that can be measured in certainty rather than mere hope. The lion stepped forward as his brother concluded, his presence serving as reminder that this was not the vision of a single primarch, but the coordinated strategy of awakened leadership that combined multiple approaches to challenges that had seemed insurmountable when faced by individual effort. When he spoke, his words carried the tactical precision that had marked him as one of the Emperor's most trusted generals. The enemy's greatest advantage has always been time, their ability to retreat into the warp when defeated, to corrupt what they could not destroy, to turn victory into delayed catastrophe through patient manipulation of forces that operated beyond imperial understanding. Yet time becomes our ally when we achieve permanent solutions to problems that previously required constant renewal of effort. Each system we cleanse provides foundation for additional operations, while each success demonstrates to friend and enemy alike that the balance of cosmic forces has shifted decisively in favor of order over chaos. The questions that followed encompassed every concern that planetary leadership could raise regarding operations whose scope transcended anything attempted since the Great Crusade itself. Resource allocation across galactic distances, coordination between military and civilian authorities, integration of new technologies with existing imperial doctrine. Each query received answers that demonstrated the depth of planning that supported what might otherwise have appeared to be optimistic speculation. As the conference concluded and representatives prepared to return to worlds that would serve as testing grounds for doctrines that could reshape the galaxy itself, Vulkan stood in the palace's highest tower and watched the sun set over a world that had been transformed from nightmare into symbol of what human determination could achieve when properly supported by power that transcended conventional limitations. The challenges that remained were significant beyond measure. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, his missing brothers waited for awakening that would require capabilities he had only begun to explore. The Chaos Gods would respond to their losses with fury that would test every defense they had established, while new forms of corruption would emerge as ancient enemies adapted to realities they had never before been forced to consider. Yet for the first time since the Horus Heresy, the servants of humanity had reason to believe that ultimate victory was not merely possible but inevitable, provided they maintained the dedication and wisdom necessary to see their quest through to completion. The eternal flame burned bright across 17 systems, and with each passing day, its influence expanded as new worlds were brought within its protection. Standing beside his brother as night fell over Hadrian's Hope, Vulkan felt satisfaction that transcended personal achievement. They had proven that primarchs long thought lost could be awakened to fight beside their living brothers, that permanent victory over chaos was achievable when sufficient power was applied with proper understanding, and that hope could be more than mere delusion when supported by capabilities that could reshape reality itself. "The flame of hope burns eternal," he declared, his words carrying across the gulf of space to touch every world where imperial citizens looked to the stars and dared to believe that tomorrow might be better than today. So long as the salamanders endure, so long as the Emperor's sons remember their duty to protect those who cannot protect themselves, that flame will never be extinguished. This is our watch, our vigil, our sacred promise to every human soul that seeks the light. Across the galaxy, on worlds where children played in streets free from corruption's taint, and elders remembered what it meant to hope for their descendants' future, the promise was heard and understood. The war against chaos continued, But it was no longer a war of mere survival. It had become a campaign of liberation whose ultimate victory was now a question of time rather than possibility. The eternal flame burned on, tended by hands that would never waver in their duty, maintained by wills that had learned to see beyond the darkness that had once seemed infinite. In its light, the future stretched ahead not as burden to be endured, but as promise to be fulfilled through service to ideals that elevated rather than corrupted the human spirit. The galaxy still held dangers that could challenge even Primarch power, but it also held hope that had been kindled by those who understood that protection of the innocent was not merely duty, but the highest calling to which any warrior could aspire. The flame would endure, burning bright against whatever darkness threatened to extinguish it, maintained by the eternal vigil of those who had sworn their lives to humanity's defense. So long as the salamanders remembered their purpose, so long as their Primarch's children carried forward the legacy of one who had returned from death itself to stand guard over those he loved, the light of hope would continue to illuminate paths toward futures that transcended the nightmares of the past. This was their promise, their covenant, their eternal flame that would burn until the last star grew cold and the final human soul found peace among the light of distant suns. The war continued, but now it was a war that could be won, and in that possibility lay the foundation for everything that humanity might yet become, when freed from the shadows that had haunted its dreams for far too long.